Four people were gunned down in an apartment complex after a young man with a promising future throws it all away. Then, a father is gunned down in front of his family when they dropped on a family. For homicide detectives, their chance of solving a murder is cut in half if they do not get a lead within the first 48 hours. Some of the participants in this documentary are actors, and some scenes have been altered for dramatic effect. A caller called 911 around 1:20 p.m. in the city of Tulsa. 911 operator asks if she needs police, fire, or medical. The caller says she needs medical. 911 operator asks her what's going on. The caller said she doesn't know. She said she just woke up and she started hearing some noises. Then she went over to her balcony and she saw that two people that have been shot. 911 operator told her officers are on their way. When the first respondents arrived, they found four people that have been shot. Two men and a woman were rushed to the hospital. The remaining person was already dead before officers arrived at the scene of the incident. 23 years old veteran detective Reggie Warren would lead the case. "What's going on?" an officer asked. Sergeant Brandon Watkins told him they have one person that is deceased on the side of the walk-in between the apartments. His name is Joshua Smith. 26 years old Joshua Smith was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and moved to Tulsa in 2013. After graduating from Atlanta High, he enrolled in culinary school and planned to open a restaurant. Joshua was survived by his mother, two brothers, two sisters, and a 1-year-old daughter. Joshua was shot 8 times. Sergeant Brandon Williams said they have 3 people that have been transported to the hospital for gunshot wounds. The man that was shot in the head is 23 years old Marco Celestine Jr. Marco and his girlfriend Raven had a child and another baby on the way. The detectives discovered several casings in the parking lot and on the sidewalks. The team also recovers 11 .40 caliber shell casings. A detective said it seems the shooting started initially in the parking lot and shot were fired and continued down to the east. While detectives Ronnie Leatherman and John Brown went out to talk to people downtown, the team canvassed the apartment complex. They got a witness to speak with them. She narrated what she knew. Detective Reggie and other detectives were not too satisfied with what they heard from her. They wanted to hear more from her, so they told her she will be more appreciated if she could come to homicide. She obliged and followed the detectives. As soon as they got to homicide, she was taken into an investigation room. Detective Ronnie was the detective that entered the interrogation room where she was being held to ask her some questions. Detective Ronnie told her to tell him everything she knows. She said she was sitting in her car watching TV, and then she heard gunshots out of nowhere. She said the gunshots were consecutive and just kept going off. She said she hit the ground. She said when the gunshot stopped, she kept on hearing the voice of a woman yelling for help. In Mobile, Alabama, a call came through to 911. 911 operators picked the call and asked the caller what her emergency was. The caller told them someone has just been shot. 911 operators asked her the location of the shooting. She kept on saying, "Stephen, baby, stay with me." The caller finally gave 911 operators her location. She said she was at Azalea and Seabreeze. 911 operators immediately transferred her over to medical. She kept saying, "I love you, Stephen, baby," while her call was transferred to the medical. A few minutes later, police and DMs responded and found a man lying on the street dead. Detective Glenn Barton asked officers if they already have the name of the victim. An officer told him that they have the victim's name and he is Stephen Fields, Jr. 39 years old Stephen Fields, Jr. worked in a construction company to support his 5 children. Stephen was recently engaged and moved in with his fiancée. Stephen was shot once in the head. A single shell casing of a 9mm Luger was found next to Stephen's foot. A witness came forward to speak with detectives. The witness said showed them Stephen's fiancée. He assured detectives that the female holding a baby over there is Stephen's fiancée. The detectives approached her and she agreed to talk when she gets to homicide. Immediately they arrived at homicide, she was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Detective Ronnie and another detective entered the interrogation room where she was been held to ask her some questions. Detective Ronnie told her he wants to know what happened. He urged her to tell him everything she knew. She said Donna called her in the morning because Donna wanted her to come to her house. She waited on Stephen to get off work because the next day was his birthday. She said she took Stephen out for dinner to celebrate his birthday. Detective Ronnie asked her if Stephen knew Donna. She said Stephen and Donna were neighbors. She said Donna moved into the house where Stephen was living with her son and his girlfriend about a month ago. She said Donna told her she just needed to talk to her for a second. She said Stephen and his son waited in the car while she went inside. When she entered, Donna told her to sit and talk to her for a second. The next thing she saw was a black guy running in the door. The black guy went to the safe that was in Donna's room. She said he told Donna he needed his gun. He said he needed to go outside. She said the black man grabbed a gun and ran out of the room. She said as he was going down the steps, she was trying to figure out what was going on. Donna ran out behind him. Detective Ronnie asked if he saw the victim get shot. She said the black guy just shot the victim in the head and the victim fell. He asked her again if she remembers what he was wearing. She said she can't tell him even one thing about him. She said she doesn't know who he was, but it sounded like he was called Smoke. Detective Ronnie asked her if she knew who called him Smoke. She said it was Donna that called him Smoke and she drove away with her son. Detective Ronnie asked her if she has any idea why anybody would shoot Stephen. She said she thinks everything that happened was a setup. She said Donna told her son in the past that Stephen owed her money. She said she was outside when she got outside. She said after she followed the gunman out of the house, she saw Donna's son lying on the street. She thinks her son and Stephen might have gotten into it and the guy got a gun and shot Stephen. At this point, Donna threatened to kill Stephen, Detective Ronnie asked. She said Donna usually threatens to kill people all the time. Just hold tight. I will be right back, Detective Ronnie said while he left the interrogation room. The detective turned to the woman who rents the apartment and who was dating Donna's son. So who stays in that apartment with you? The detective asked. She said she and her kids. Who else stays at the house? The detective asked again. Mama, she replied. What exactly do you remember about when everything went down? The detective continued with his investigation. She said when the girl knocked at the door she asked her what she wanted. She said she opened the door. She said her old man and little skinny dude were getting into it. She said while she was at the door, she saw Stephen and a black male fighting in the street. She said Mama ran out of the house. She ran past her. She saw Stephen and the skinny dude tussling. After that, she heard a firecracker. She said the skinny black dude ran behind the back of her apartment. Back to the other murder case, detectives just learned that a witness responded to the female victim. The witness was brought to homicide for questioning. As soon as she arrived at homicide, she was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. After a series of questions and answers with Detective Ronnie, the witness was given a card that had Detective Ronnie's name and phone number on it. He told her to call him as soon as he has any information concerning the murder. Detective Leatherman visited the hospital where the surviving female victim was taken to. He requested to have chat with her before he is prepared for surgery. Detective Ronnie asked her who shot her and she said it was Caleb Young. He asked her what happened. She said she was there to visit her friend called Josh and one of Caleb's friends was there. She said she saw him on the phone and he was looking at her. She has a feeling that he was on the phone with Caleb. About 30 minutes later, Caleb popped up. Detective Ronnie asked her why he did that. She said he did that because they broke up. Detective Ronnie left the hospital room while he left the medical personnel to attend to her. Detective Ronnie called Detective Reggie immediately he left the possible. He told about Caleb Young. He wants him to look for Caleb in the database if he can get any information on him. A few minutes later, Detective Reggie found Caleb in the database. Information from the database showed that 20-year-old Caleb Young has no prior convictions. The next task for the detectives is to locate Caleb and bring him for questioning. They headed out to the location they found. While driving close to the location, they spotted Caleb leaving in a car. The detectives tracked and stopped the car and transported Caleb to homicide. With a search warrant in hand, the team searches the house but they did not find any gun. While the team was carrying out an on-site investigation, the victim's dad showed up. Did your son have a girlfriend or baby ma'am out east? A detective asked him. He claims Caleb's ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend shot up his family's house and car. Detective Ronnie said what she told them might help her son out. He asked if she will be willing to follow them. Definitely yeah, he replied. The detectives and left with him to homicide for questioning. Detective Reggie enters the room where Caleb was been held. "How are you, brother?" he asked. "Fine," Caleb replied. Detective Reggie introduced his partner called Detective Ryden to Caleb. Detective Reggie asked him if he needed anything like water or food. He said he is good. Detective Ryden said he has 4 people shot at the moment and he doesn't know why. Back to the mobile investigation of Stephen Fields Jr., a witness has just revealed to detectives that she knows the shooter. A detective asked the witness if he can describe him. She said the suspect is 5'11", a black guy, and skinny. Smoke's wife, a detective asked. The witness said she is a white girl. He asked her how old she was. She said the information is on Facebook. The detective asked her if she can pull up her information on Facebook real quick. She said she can do it real quick. Barton finds Jamal's last known address. The detective headed to a location they know Jamal stay at. A few minutes later, they arrived at the address. When they arrived at the address, they knocked on the door. A woman showed up at the door. He told her his name is Detective Barton and he wants to know if Jamal was there. She said Jamal was not there. She said she has been trying to get in touch with him. She said she has been calling him. "Well, this is my phone number," Detective Barton said. He gave her his phone number and urged her to call him if Jamal shows up. The next day, the team picks up Donna at her apartment complex. Detective Glenn told Donna that he just wanted to speak with her. Donna said that's fine. Detective Barton told Donna to explain what happened to him. She said someone knocked on her door. She said the people used to live down the road. She said they always come hounding. She said she asked him if he has $5 she can use for gas or she can help her buy her baby diapers. Detective Barton asked her if she told her to come over to her apartment. She said she didn't tell her. Detective Barton said he didn't buy the idea that she just showed up randomly. She said she told her she was bringing money. Donna admits Stephen owed her money. Detective Barton asked her what happened when she was talking in her room. She said somebody runs in and that was when she walked outside. She said her son was in the middle of the road. She said she thought her son was dead. Detective Barton asked her if she had talked to Stephen. She said she hollered at Stephen. I asked him what he did to her son. He said Stephen came over to her son and pushed her down. She said he was irate. He was always screaming and cussing me. She said it was in the processing of getting up after he pushed her that she heard a gunshot. Then, Stephen fell. Detective Barton asked who was with him when it happened. She said it was Jamal. He asked her where the person went from there. She said she doesn't know where the boy would have gone to. Detective Barton asked her if she has ever threatened Stephen in any way. She said no. Detective Barton asked her if she does not feel somehow that Stephen dies the day he showed up at her place. In the quadruple shooting in Tulsa, detectives have just identified a suspect. The fugitive warrant squad has just brought in the suspected shooter Caleb Young. Caleb was taken to an interrogation room and prepared for questioning. Detective Reggie and Detective Ronnie entered the interrogation room to question Caleb. Detective Reggie told Caleb that he has been talking to his dad and his dad told him that he had a plan of joining the military. Caleb said he went to take his drug test today until all this happened. Detective Reggie told Caleb that he got information that somebody shoot his dad's house up. He asked him if that was correct and he said yes. Detective Reggie asked Caleb if he was around when the house got shot. Caleb said everybody was around. He said his sisters, his mom, his stepmom, and his father were all around. Detective Reggie asked him if he knows why anybody would have shot up that house. He said it was because he broke up with his girlfriend. Detective Ronnie said he guessed she has a new boyfriend. Caleb said yes. He said her new boyfriend shot up his house. Detective Ronnie asked him if he has ever met her new boyfriend before. He said he hasn't met him. He said about a month and a half ago, they called his phone talking about how they pulled up to his house. He said his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend threatened him just a day before his house was shot up. Detective Ronnie said something triggered him today. He said his friend called him and told him she was at the apartment complex. He asked Caleb where he was at that time. He said he was up north. Detective Ronnie asked Caleb if he drives to the apartment complex. He said when he arrived at the complex, what was in his mind. Caleb remained hesitant and didn't want to talk for a few minutes. But after the detectives mounted much pressure on him, he finally agreed that he shot him. Detective Ronnie asked Caleb where everybody was standing then. He said they were all standing by the stairs. Caleb said he spotted his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend and he started shooting. Detective Ronnie asked him how far away he was when the shooting started. He said he was close. Detective Ronnie asked him if he had already determined that he was going to shoot anyone he sees with his ex-girlfriend. He replied in the affirmative. Detective Ronnie told him that he said he has never seen him before. Caleb said it didn't matter to him at that time. Detective Ronnie asked Caleb if he ever thought it was a good idea that if people shot at his house, he should call the police. Caleb said he already called the police and made a complaint. He said there was nothing the police were going to do if they came back and shoot up his house. Detective Ronnie asked him if he realized that some of the people he shot are those leaving in the complex who had no idea about whatever happened between him and his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend. Caleb said he understood that completely. Caleb said people that know him know that he gets mad if someone messes with him. He said he just got to a point where he was never going to stop. Back to the mobile murder of Stephen Fields Jr., detectives need to know if a woman named Donna ever threatened him. Donna said there was no way she could take someone's life. The detective said he was not saying she took someone's life. She quickly interjected and kept saying no, no, no. The detective told Donna to stay put and he left the interrogation room. 4 hours later, detectives got a call from a tipster who gave them the location of Jamal. They tracked him down and brought him back to homicide. As soon as they arrived at homicide, Jamal was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Detective Ronnie and Detective Jeremy were the detectives that will interrogate Jamal. Detective Ronnie asked Jamal if he needed anything before the interrogation will commence. He said he is okay and doesn't need anything. Detective Ronnie said he doesn't want to waste Jamal's time. He said he wants Jamal to tell him about what happened yesterday. He urged Jamal to tell him everything that he knows without concealing any information. Jamal said he was fixing his radiator in front of his apartment when Donna's son returned home. He said Donna's son went in and came back outside. He said Donna's son noticed an unfamiliar car that was parked in a parking spot that was reserved only for residents. He said when Donna's son asks the guy who he was, the guy asked Donna's son if he was the dude that his mother owed money. He kept repeating to Donna's son how his mother owed him money. He said after some minutes, the guy came out of his car and he said he was going to beat Donna's son's ass. Jamal said Stephen became estranged when he was confronted about his debt to Donna and hit her son. He said the next thing he heard was a bomb sound. He said when he looked back, he saw how Stephen's head hit the ground. It bounced back and hit the ground again. Detective Ronnie followed that question with another question. He told Jamal that he wants to know what else he did. Jamal said, like what in amazement. He asked Jamal where he got the gun that he used to shoot the deceased. Jamal said he got it at the safe. Detective Ronnie asked him if Mama had already left the room. He said they were already downstairs. He said he was the last person in the house. Detective Ronnie asked him what he saw when he got out of the house. He said he walked down the steps. He saw how he and Mama wanted to fight. He said he put Mama on the ground and he was already swinging on Mama. Detective Ronnie asked him what he did when he saw him swinging Mama. Jamal said he shot him. Detective Ronnie asked for a couple of minutes and left the interrogation room. Jamal Hamilton was charged with murder and he is awaiting trial. No one else has been charged in connection with the murder of Stephen Fields Jr. Fields Jr. Fields Jr. 11:32 a.m. on Valentine's Day in Gwinnett. A call came through for 911 operatives. An operative picked the call and asked for the address of the emergency of the caller. The caller said Hunter Ridge Lane, Norcross. The operator asked the caller what is going on at the address. The caller said they heard at least 6 shots. He said they walked outside and they saw a guy lying on the ground bleeding. The operator asked the caller if it appears like the victim is breathing. The caller said the victim was barely breathing. The operator told the caller that police and paramedics are already on their way. The caller told the operative that he is not sure how long the victim was going to survive. For homicide detectives, their chance of solving a murder is cut in half if they do not get a lead within the first 48 hours. CPL Patrick Dunning briefed team members. He said when the call came in, it sounded like 6 to 7 shots. He said their victim was unfortunately in a pretty rough shape. ENS rushed the victim to the hospital, but he didn't survive. CPL Patrick said anytime someone gets murdered in the middle of the day, it makes it seem like the person who was responsible does not care if anybody sees them. He said it leads him to think that it could personal. A 19-year-old veteran with Gwinnett County PD, Corporal Patrick Dunning, who joined homicide a year ago, will lead the investigation. When CPL Patrick got to the scene of the incident, he met other detectives who had gotten there before him. He asked one of the detectives if they have gotten the name of the victim. The detective said the name of the victim is Darian Dennis. 24 years old Darian Dennis attended Hutchinson Community College. He worked as a furniture mover and hoped to get a commercial driver's license. Near where Darian's body was found, detectives found 2 .40 caliber shell casings and a .40 caliber Glock. A detective said the gun was next to the victim's hand that was laid out flat. He said it seems like the gun was in his hand when he fell. Sergeant John Richter said he got off 2 rounds. He asked other members of the casings, but they could not find any casings they believe from the suspect's gun. Darian's mother and brother have learned of his death and arrive at the scene. Darian's brother told CPL Patrick that he was just at the house when someone called him and informed him. He said he ran up there with his mother after they got the information. CPL Patrick asked Darian's brother if he lives in the complex. He said they stay at the back. CPL Patrick asked Darian's brother if they had any racial issues with anyone. He said they have no issues with anyone. While CPL Patrick was having a chat with Darian's brother, Darian's father called. He asked to speak with CPL Patrick. CPL Patrick introduced himself to Darian's father. Darian's father asked CPL Patrick that if somebody was saying that his son got shot. CPL Patrick replied in the affirmative, hoping to get a lead about who would want him dead. Darian's father said Darian always carried a gun. He said Darian has a Georgia state permit for concealed carry and owned a Glock. He said Darian left their apartment to go to a convenience store across the street. Corporal Harrison went over there with the hope that he could get anything on video that will show Darian at the store before the incident happened. He said the owner of the store has it on his phone and he was not there. Sergeant Micah Hegwood said the plan was to have the owner download that block of time. 2 hours in, a man who was hanging out by the store came forward. He said he heard a gunshot. Then after 30 seconds, he saw a Toyota car leaving the complex. He said the Toyota is a 4-door, cream-colored car with 2 holes in the driver's side. He said the car made a right turn. He said they were going slow, watching that nobody was coming. He said all he saw were 2 black males. CPL Brian Dormany asked if anyone saw a cream-color 4-door Toyota similar to a Camry slowly exiting the entrance to the apartment complex, but no one replied. A detective said the description the witness gave matches the evidence that the victim squeezed off 2 rounds. A license plate reader near the complex captured a car matching the suspect's vehicle moments before the 911 call. CPL Patrick told team members that they have a tag. The next job is to see if they can track it. CPL Patrick ran a tag number to see if it has been caught on other license plate readers since leaving the area. His search revealed that the car was the last hit in Cobb County off Bentley Road at 148. The car was just photographed 17 miles away. Corporal James Lawson tracked down the vehicle owner's address. It's registered to a woman 25 miles away in the same direction the car was heading. CPL Brian said they should go and talk to the owner and find out who got in the car and where the car is. The team left the scene and headed to the address of the owner. While they were driving, CPL Patrick said they are hopeful that they can at least put their eyes on the car. But if they don't see the vehicle, they will at least have to track down the owner. When they got to the address, they found a Toyota at the side of the building that matched what they were looking for. It had bullet holes. CPL Patrick told the driver to pull over and stay very close to the apartment. He told the driver to stay in a position where they will have to drive past them to leave the complex. Corporal Brian Dominy and John Richter will keep their eyes on the Camry while Corporal Patrick and Corporal Lawson will cob the police headquarters to get a search warrant. Before they arrive, the suspect's vehicle left the complex and police stopped in a restaurant parking lot. Policemen told the driver to step out of the vehicle slowly. They told him to walk slowly towards the sound of their voice. The woman they apprehended is the owner of the suspect's vehicle. While officers took the woman to Cobb County PD for questioning, Corporal Richter and the team searched her apartment. When they arrived at the headquarters, she was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Corporal Patrick Dunning and Corporal Lawson entered the room to interrogate her after she settled. Corporal Patrick Dunning introduced himself and his colleague. He told her that they are with the Gwinnett County Police. He told her that he was playing catch-up trying to figure out who she was and she was doing there today. She said she drove her car home this morning after spending the night at a friend's house. Corporal Patrick Dunning asked her if she was currently living with someone. She said she lives with a friend of her ex-boyfriend. He asked her the name of the friend. She said his name is Quentin Lawton. He asked her how old Quentin was. She said Quentin should be 30 years old. Corporal Patrick Dunning asked her where Quentin was when she came back around 8 a.m. She said she went to her room. She said Quentin might have been there, but she was not sure because she didn't see him. She said around 10 a.m., her friend picked her up to go shopping. She said they went to the store to get some outfits because they were going out. Corporal Patrick Dunning asked her the actual time she got to her apartment in the evening. She said she got to her apartment around 6 p.m., and she got into her car and drove off. Corporal Patrick asked her if she noticed any damage to the vehicle when she was about to enter the vehicle. She said she was getting pulled over, so she got out of the car, and she saw 2 holes that were taped on the driver's side. She said she started asking herself what was going on. Corporal Patrick asked her if Quentin drives. She said Quentin drives because he owns a BMW. Corporal Patrick told her that the reason why he was asking all those questions is that her car was involved in a shooting and the person that was shot died, so the case is a homicide investigation. He said she is more than welcome to start her explanation all over again. She said she believed that he may have done something. Corporal Patrick Dunning asked her what she was referring to. She said, Quentin. She said Quentin has a spare key that she kept in the kitchen. He asked her if Quentin could potentially have accessed her car. She said Quentin called her a lot today. She said it was after 11 a.m. that Quentin called her, and he was saying something happened, but he was reluctant to tell her what happened. She said she texted him and asked if he was good. He told her that he was cleaning. Corporal Patrick asked her that when Quentin told her that he was cleaning, didn't she ask him what he was cleaning? She said she didn't because she was focused on her own thing. She said she just told him okay. Corporal Patrick asked her if Quentin talked about being with anyone. She said he didn't tell her someone was with him, but she heard the voice of a 16-year-old guy. Corporal Patrick asked her if she knows the name of the guy. She was not able to give him the name, but she gave him the nickname of the teenager. Corporal Patrick asked her that if he wants to see Quentin right now, where would be the best place he can find him? She said she doesn't know. Corporal Patrick asked her if she doesn't have a problem with them looking through her phone. She said she doesn't have a problem with that. Corporal Patrick asked her if she knows whether Quentin was on social media. She said she has Quentin on Instagram. She gave them Quentin's name on Instagram and that of his teenager's friend. Corporal Patrick went through the phone and he was able to find the teenager's number. He told her that he saw evidence of phone calls. He said they will take her phone for a minimum of a night. He stood up and appreciated her cooperation before leaving the interrogation room with his colleague. While they were walking to their seats, Corporal Patrick told Corporal Lawson that they have 2 people of strong interest at the moment. He said, for now, both of them are the 2 main suspects. When they eventually joined other team members, They met the detectives who went to search the apartment. The detectives said they didn't find anything in the apartment. 30 years old Quentin Lawton has prior convictions for robbery with a firearm and armed false imprisonment in Broward County, Florida. Detectives used the teenager's phone number to track down his name. They were also able to get the license plate on the BMW car Quentin drove on the day of the incident. Corporal Patrick said there is a chance that Quentin could flee the jurisdiction of the state. He said he will put together search warrants for Darian's, Quentin's, and the teenager's phone records. He said he feels that there is a connection. He said hopefully the phone records will show that there is a connection between the suspects and the victim, and they will be able to put those suspects at the scene of the crime at the time of the homicide. The next morning, as they wait for the phone records, a video from the convenience store near the crime scene came in. The video revealed that 5 minutes before Darian's murder, he came outside of the store and was going through his phone. It was not clear whether he was texting or making a phone call or listening to music. It was like he was supposed to meet someone at the store. A few minutes later, he walked off away from the building and headed towards his apartment complex. A tan car moved out of the building as soon as Darian moved out. The detectives identified the car as the suspect's vehicle. Corporal Harrison said it was almost like the car moved when it spotted Darian. The car pulled on a Peachtree Corners circle, turned right, and pulled left into the apartment complex. The video showed Darian walking into the apartment complex a minute before the shooting. That afternoon, detectives decided to search the suspect's vehicle. After the search, detectives believed that the shot was fired by the driver. They agreed to test all the evidence for fingerprints and DNA. With little else to go on, Detective Patrick looked through Darian's Instagram page with the hope that he can see any connections between him and Quentin or the teenager. He saw a picture of Darian standing in front of his old school teammates. He also saw a video of Darian rapping at an event, but everything he saw did not reveal any connection between Darian, Quentin, and the teenager. In the first 48, Gwinnett County Homicide responded to the murder of 24 years old Darian Dennis. They spoke to a witness who saw a beige Toyota Camry leaving the scene with bullet holes in the driver's side door. They interviewed the owner of the Camry, who said that a man named Quentin Lawton had access to her car on the day of the incident. They also discovered a video of the Camry and Darian at the crime scene moments before the shooting. 5 days after Darian was murdered, Corporal Patrick said there has been a delay in the return on the cell phone records. He said that unfortunately, they are to the mercy of the cell phone companies. He said the longer the delay, the more time the two suspects are out there. He said it is a very dangerous situation. A few days later, Corporal Patrick got a cell phone dump on a registered owner of the vehicle that the suspect was driving. Their FaceTime message was at 11:55. 13 minutes after the murder, Quentin FaceTimed the woman who owns the suspect's vehicle. Corporal Patrick looked at the internet search history of the owner of the vehicle. He found out that she searched for a body repairs shop near her at noon. At 2:30 in the afternoon, she researched Bath and Bay Works. She also researched Gwinnett County. She found the Gwinnett Police Department Twitter feed and she clicked on it. And the headline was "Police are investigating the murder of a man who was shot at Peachtree Corners." He said she knew about everything when she was first invited. She was feigning the surprise she had on her face. Corporal Patrick said their next goal is to have a conversation with her again and see what more information she can provide them. He said hopefully the conversation would lead them to obtain an arrest warrant for Quentin. A week later, she was invited back to headquarters. Corporal Patrick told her that he wanted to let her know about what was going on in the case. He told her that they have recovered physical evidence out of the car. He said he would like to rehash some things. He asked her if Quentin came to her physically when he wanted to go out in her car. She said he came to her physically. Corporal Patrick said she didn't tell him that back on the 14th. He asked her if Quentin told her where he was going with the car or what he wanted to use the car for. She said he didn't tell her. Corporal Patrick said, so Quentin does whatever he wants with her car, and then made a couple of phone calls to her. She said yes, but he was panicking and he said someone tried to rob him and they shot the CR. Corporal Patrick said what she was telling him now was different from what she told him when she was first invited. Corporal Patrick told her that they did a search warrant on her phone. He said that, at one point, she started searching for what happened. She said she did. He asked her how she knew where it happened. She said when they were getting ready to leave, they saw Quentin in her car. She said 4 hours before she was stopped by the police, his friend picked her up, and they ran into Quentin when he was trying to return her car. She said when she went to the car, Quentin told her he was at Peachtree Corners. Corporal Patrick said so she started googling Gwinnett County Peachtree Corners. He asked her what she saw. She said she saw that there was a homicide. He asked her if she asked Quentin who shot who, and did Quentin give her an answer. He said he wants to know what Quentin said because there was more to this, because she didn't tell him everything the first night, and she is still not telling him everything again. She said she has told him everything she knew. She said she has nothing to hide. Corporal Patrick said just to make sure that he is clear, Quentin told her that he was on Peachtree Corners Circle and somebody tried to rob him, and her car was shot up. She said yes. She said Quentin told her that his teenage friend was in the car. Corporal Patrick asked her where she thinks Quentin will be. She said Quentin might be staying with a female friend. He asked her if she knows the address. She told him that the address is on her phone. Corporal Patrick went through the phone and found the female friend's contact information. He told her that he needs to get back to work, and he left the interrogation room. When Corporal Patrick joined his teammates, he told them that he still thinks that she is holding back, but the big takeaway from the interrogation was that she gave him a story that Quentin told her. He said Quentin concocted the story that he got robbed and that her car got shot up. He said obviously, the physical evidence does not necessarily match. He said they believe that the damage to the vehicle came from gunshots that were fired from inside the car. He said the next steps are to reach out to Quentin, then the teenager, and see if they are willing to provide any kind of statement as to about where they were and what they were doing on the day of the incident. 24 days in, with still no phone records on Darian or the suspect, Corporal Patrick reached out to Quentin, but he did not respond. He said he thinks Quentin was not going to call back. Detective Harrison said Quentin might talk to Corporal Patrick, but the only way he was going to get him there is with an arrest warrant. The next morning, Corporal Patrick and Detective Casey decided to run by the address of Quentin's female friend to see if he was still in the area. They drove for several minutes around the area, but they didn't see anyone. A few moments later, a call came into Corporal Patrick's phone. He was told that Quentin's attorney has reached out to Homicide. He said the attorney relayed that Quentin wasn't the shooter, but he knows the shooter. Corporal Patrick said Quentin's attorney was trying to lay down some sort of self-defense claim. He said he was going to reach out to the attorney because he is curious to know the connection between the victim and them. 2 days later, Corporal Patrick gets Quentin's story from his attorney. He was able to confirm that Quentin was involved in the incident. The attorney said the story Quentin told him was that he was driving the juvenile over the Peachtree Corner to go see his girlfriend. It was Valentine's Day, so he had flowers and other stuff. They claimed that they got lost and flagged the victim to ask him for directions. The victim started freaking out on them, and he hot agitated very fast. He immediately pulled out a gun and gunshots were exchanged. Quentin is claiming that he wasn't the shooter. Corporal Patrick said it looks to him like the driver was holding the gun. He said Quentin's story just doesn't make sense to him. He said it looked to him that Quentin was prepared for more than a date. He said if they could set up a time for Quentin to come in for a formal interview, they could get more from him. They reached out to the attorney and he agreed to bring Quentin to Homicide for a formal interview in 4 days. Corporal Patrick told his team members that he will allow Quentin to tell his story Then, he will start to pick holes in it and show him that the evidence appears to show that the gun was fired by somebody from the driver's seat. He said if Quentin tells a story that puts the gun and the actual murder in the lap of the teenager. In the meantime, Corporal Patrick will try to track down the teenager with the hope that the teenager will try to clear his name. The next day, Corporal Patrick reached out to the teenager and spoke to his mother. He said he let her know that if her son had anything to do with this, now would be the best time for him to get out in front of it and make a statement. The mother planned to bring the teenager to tell his story once they retain an attorney. 29 days, and while waiting for Darian's and the suspect's phone records, the team prepares to meet with Quentin face to face. As the deadline passes, Quentin's attorney called Detective Patrick and asked him to meet him in the parking lot. When Patrick got to the parking lot, he met only Quentin's attorney. Corporal Patrick told the attorney that he was under the impression that Quentin was going to show up at Homicide by 5 p.m. and give them his side of the story. Quentin's attorney told Corporal Patrick that he is not playing cat and mouse with him. Corporal Patrick said it has been a month now, and he has not been able to produce Quentin. The attorney said he knows. He said he feels like he has got some good stuff for him to share. He said he vetted Quentin, and he believed him. He said Quentin has answers. According to the attorney, Quentin doesn't know Darian. He said Quentin is adamant. He said Quentin told him that he has no clue about who Darian was, and his only mistake was leaving the scene of the incident. Corporal Patrick told the attorney that what they have an issue with is if everything that happened was random, why Quentin didn't stick around. The attorney said Quentin didn't stick around because he went to prison. So, Quentin is like every other black kid in the country. He is scared of the police. Corporal Patrick told the attorney that the ball is his guy's court. He said he appreciates everything the attorney has said to him, but he will rather hear the words coming out from Quentin's mouth. He told the attorney to give him a call back. Detectives decided it was time they made their move. They submitted an arrest warrant to the DA based on the circumstantial evidence they had on Quentin. The next morning, Corporal Patrick sent the fugitive warrant unit to stake out the home of Quentin's female friend. Corporal Patrick himself went to Darian's family to give them an update about their investigation. He told them that there are 2 individuals that they are looking at. He said he has secured an arrest warrant for 1 individual. Quentin's father said the family has been thinking of having a resolution to the case. He said part of the reason why his son is not alive was that someone did not have a spirit of forgiveness. He said he is ready to see the person and see what the person's explanation is for why the incident happened. Corporal Patrick told him that they are trying to do everything to help the family. Quentin's father gave Corporal Patrick a portrait of his son as a gift. They both greeted each other and Corporal Patrick left. Then, the fugitive warrants unit called Detective Patrick and informed him that they have arrested Quentin at his female friend's apartment. They said he did not want to speak with detectives at the time of his arrest, but he has been transported to Gwinnett County Jail. Corporal Patrick said they still have 1 outstanding. He said hopefully if they can pull up the cell phone that belongs to the second suspect at the scene, they can go ahead and secure an arrest warrant for him. After 2 months, Detective Patrick finally got the phone records for Darian, Quentin, and the teenager. The phone records revealed that there were no phone calls between Darian, Quentin, and the teenager, but the phone records for Quentin showed that right at 11:30, Quentin's phone pings off the nearest tower. He said that was the digital evidence that they were looking for. The phone records of the teenager revealed that between 10 a.m. and 10:45 a.m., the cell phone was pinging off the tower in Marietta. He said they didn't get additional pings because the phone was not in Gwinnett County and it wasn't in use. He said that does not exclude him from their suspects list. He said it's going to go for trial, and they will see where it takes them to. He said there will be a backstory that Quentin is going to tell. He said maybe when that happens, they will be able to turn the page. Quentin Lawton's prints were later found on the roll of tape in the suspect's vehicle. He was charged with aggravated assault and felony murder. He is awaiting trial. The teenager has not been charged with any crime concerning the murder of Darian Dennis. 8:08 p.m. in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A caller called 911. 911 operator. Do you need police, fire, or medical? Caller. Police. The caller said he is at the corner of 54th Street and Johnstown. He said he just heard a gunshot after an argument, and the argument stopped after the argument. 911 operator. How many gunshots did you hear? Caller. Just one. The 911 operator said he will inform the police. A few minutes later, another caller called 911. 911 operator. This is EMSA. What is your emergency? Caller. I was just walking up the street and I look up in the driveway and I saw a guy sitting in a chair with a gunshot wound to his head. 911 operator. Is there more than one wound? The caller said he just saw one that is coming out of the man's head. 911 operator. Okay. Caller. God. 911 operator. Is he still breathing? Caller. Yes. He is still breathing. 911 operator. Just keep talking to him. Tell him you've got help on the way. Detectives made their way to the crime scene. They found a man lying wounded with gunshot wounds. Is he bleeding via a gunshot wound? A detective asked. Yes, another detective answered. Detectives said the victim is in grave condition. He should be taken to St. John's Hospital. For homicide detectives, their chance of solving a murder is cut in half if they do not get a lead within the first 48 hours. Detectives are heading to North Tulsa. There was a black male that was shot at the front of his residence. Health officials have been working on him, and detectives just got a word that unfortunately, he died at the hospital. Victim seated in his chair, a detective asked. Yeah, someone replied. He said apparently when they were out there, he had a hospital bracelet worn with the name Sidney on it. The victim did, a detective asked again. The victim did. He replied. 55 years old Sidney Ray was born and raised in Tulsa. After earning a bachelor's in communications, he served in the Army for a year and a half before being honorably discharged. When he returned home, he attended truck driving school and worked as a landscaper. He was survived by his mother and 3 children. A detective said he believed that Sidney was shot. He said he was shot once. He said the bullet didn't pass all the way through but stayed in his head. Sidney was shot once on the right side of his head. A detective at the crime scene said he is not seeing any blood spatter on the wall or anything. He said what this tells him is that Sidney was probably leaning forward when he was shot. In the course of searching the crime scene, a detective saw a 9mm casing and 2 different types of cigarettes. So, who else lives in this house? A detective asked. No one answered the door. Another detective replied. A female detective at the crime scene said she has talked to the person that owns the house. She said the owner of the house told her that Sidney and 2 other people lived in the house. She said she gave her the name of the 2 other people. Perfect, a detective answered. Patrol learned that Sidney's housemates have been out of town for 4 days. What this shows is that Sidney was at home alone when he was shot. Only the neighbor who called 911 would be able to provide some information that can give detectives a lead. Detectives have a witness. She said she hears Sidney arguing with someone moments before the shooting, but she didn't hear what they were saying. She said she heard the suspect talking to someone. Like shoot him, a detective asked. Yeah, just like that. She said after that, she heard a gunshot and everything just went quiet. She said she looks out her window and she saw 2 black males. She said one black male and the other she can tell who he is. She said the suspects fled to an open garage next door. She said they were only there for a couple of seconds. After that, they came out down the driveway and entered a white car. She said the suspect car did not start. She said she saw him grabbing a tool to start the vehicle, and they took off and go through the west. How did the garage door get closed? A detective asked. That's $1 million question. We do not know how it got closed, another detective replied. Detectives knocked on the door of one of Sydney's neighbors. What do you know about this house next door? A detective asked. I do not know anything about it. I just know the neighbor. He is always outside fixing on his car, he replied. What does he normally drive? The detective asked again. He drives a blue Mustang, he replied. Have you seen any white cars there before? The detective asked again. No, he replied. Do you know the name of the guy that lives next to you? The detective asked again. No, I don't, he replied. He said it's a young couple that lives there. The detective asked him if he knows the victim's name. He said he doesn't know him either. The detective asked if he has seen a neighbor associate with the victim before. He replied in the affirmative. The detective said he was going to leave his number with the neighbor. He told him to call him if he happens to hear something. The detectives think they might have to search the garage. They cannot search it immediately, though, because they need a warrant from a court of competent jurisdiction. 2 hours in, Sergeant Brandon Watkins speaks to Sydney's brother and sister-in-law who were away on vacation. They said they heard from a neighbor that Sydney was shot. Sergeant Brandon told them that Sydney was taken to St. John's Hospital after he was shot. But unfortunately, Sydney died. Sergeant Brandon asked them if they knew anybody that Sydney was having any kind of trouble with recently. They said they do not know anyone Sydney was having any kind of trouble with. Sergeant Brandon ended the call after thanking them for speaking to him. Sergeant Brandon told other officers that Sydney's brother and sister-in-law told him that Sydney was shot in his chair at that residence on the 15th of May last year. He said they made him know that it was 2 young guys that shot him then. They said he was shot in the back and stomach then. Another detective said their story has explained why Sydney had bracelets on his wrist. He said Sydney's brother said he couldn't let him stay in his house because he was throwing trash in the neighbors' yards, and he was aggressive with everybody. He said there was a lady who said yesterday, or the day before yesterday, the guy that was sitting in the chair out there started screaming at her. The guy told her to get out of his sight. While the team waited for a search warrant to search the victim's house and garage, a detective said someone just showed up at the house. He said they might be able to get a waiver. Do you live here? A detective asked him. Yes, sir, I do, he replied. Do you mind signing a waiver for us to search your garage? A detective asked. Yeah, he replied. As officers searched the garage, they began to see different ammunitions. They found 5 guns, including a 9mm Luger and a cock gun. The detectives believe they may have found the weapon used for the murder. The owner of the house swore that he does not know these ammunitions exist in his garage. A detective said he will send the ammunitions to ballistic for investigation. The detective asked him if his garage door was up. He said no. He said his garage door was not open. The detective asked again if there is any way they can get into his garage door. He said the back door doesn't lock. The detective told him that he has talked to a couple of his neighbors, and they said he has associated with the people next door. He said he is a mechanic, so he always works on their cars. The detective asked him about the guy that drives a white car and sits at the front that needed to jumpstart before he left there tonight. He said he doesn't know what white car the detective is talking about. Listen, these cats were in your garage. They probably dumped the murder weapon off in your garage. I want you to think about this. Who have you seen over there? And what kind of activity have you seen over there? The detective asked him. He said honestly, he did not see any activity over there. He said he doesn't associate with anybody. He asked for the detective's number so that he can call him when he sees any activity going on over there. Another detective suggested that Dylan be taken downtown. He said the detective should apply some type of pressure on him and see if he will stick with the story he told them initially. The detective said what the guy said made no sense to him, because if it was one gun they found stashed in his yard or under a trash can, it would have been understandable. But the numerous guns found in his yard suggest he still has a lot to say. The detective who had a chat with Dylan said his interaction with him suggests to him that he was believable. He said he has been wrong before. So, if the other detective suggests he should be taken downtown and interrogated more, then they should go ahead and do it. A detective went to the Dylan door again and knocked. Immediately he came out. The detective told him to put on his shirt, his shoes, and bring along his phone real quick. As soon as they arrived at Homicide, Dylan was taken to the interrogation room for questioning. The detective said he appreciates his coming down to Homicide. He said he knows it sucks. Dylan interjected quickly and told the detective that he can have his phone if that is what he wants. The detective asked him if he doesn't have any issues with him looking at his phone. He said he doesn't. He said the detective can go through his pictures and his contacts. Another detective came into the interrogation room during the interrogation. The detective that was talking to Dylan gave the detective Dylan's phone, and he told him that Dylan has permitted them to check his phone. He said he has permitted them to do whatever they want to do with his phone. The detective continued his interrogation while he gave the phone to the detective that joined him. He asked Dylan about the guns that were found in his garage. He said, "Is there any way that Dylan's fingerprint or DNA is going to be on those guns?" He said no. "How do you know that?" the detective asked again. He said he hasn't touched any of those guns, so there is no way his fingerprints will be on the guns. The detective asked him again if any of his neighbors have entered his garage before. No, he replied. The detective asked Dylan if he received any phone call this evening from anybody that suggested the person was going to hide something or put something in his garage. He said no. The detective asked again if he hung out with any black guy at his house. He said not really. The detective said the reason he is asking is because of a picture he saw on his phone. The guy stood up to show him the picture. The picture showed he was with a guy in his garage. The detective asked if he knows the guy. He said yes. He said the guy in the picture is his buddy. He said his name is Skyler. The detective asked him when the picture was taken. Dylan said the picture was taken a couple of weeks ago. He helped the detective check the exact day the picture was taken. Dylan gave the detective Skyler's full name and says he helped him work on his truck. The detective asked Dylan if he was expecting anybody in his house this evening. "No, sir," he replied. The other detective who was checking Dylan's phone left the interrogation room. He left Dylan and the detective that was interrogating him from the start. Immediately the detective left. Dylan said he was expecting to go home and eat his damn tacos and go to bed. The detective said he was going to take Dylan's fingerprint, and that way he can compare it to any prints that are going to be on those guns. The detective asked Dylan if he doesn't have any issue with taking a DNA swab. Dylan said he doesn't care. The detective left the room and told Dylan that he will be right back. The detective that checked Dylan's phone said he was not feeling him. He said he feels if Dylan knows anything he would have told them. Detective Reggie asked the detective that interrogated Dylan if he mentioned a black male known as Skyler. The detective said he did. Detective Rogers said he blew that up. Detective Reggie himself made his way to the interrogation room to interrogate Dylan. Detective Reggie, "Hey, you look tired, man. Let me ask you something. Is Skyler your friend?" Dylan, yeah. Detective Reggie, "You said he is a black male." Dylan, "Yeah." Detective Reggie, "Okay. Where does he live? Do you know?" Dylan, "Out west. We go to school together." Detective Reggie, "What school?" Dylan, "Central." Detective Reggie, "How old is Skyler?" Dylan, "I'd say 27. Detective Reggie, "Okay." During the interrogation, Detective Mark Kennedy received a call from Dave. Dave went through Dylan's Facebook page and found the Skyler he was talking about. The information on Dylan's Facebook page shows that Dylan is a white male. Detective Mark shows Dylan the picture of the white male. "That's Skyler," Dylan said. Detective Mark, "That's not the guy in the picture that you identified as Skyler. That was an older, bald, black man." Detective Mark, "So, are you ready to tell the truth now?" Dylan, okay, that's the neighbor. Detective Mark, out by your garage. Dylan, yes. He helped me push my truck out. Detective Mark, who is the neighbor? Dylan, his name is Reggie. Detective Mark, do you know Reggie's last name? Dylan, no. I don't. Detective Mark, which house does he live at? Dylan, I've seen him next door, next to me to the left. Detective Mark, like the one that the murder happened. Dylan, yes. Detective Mark, does he live over there? Dylan, I don't know who lives there. Detective Mark, okay, but Reggie frequents that house next door. Dylan, yes, sir. Detective Mark, why didn't you tell us that? Dylan, because he is in the picture and I didn't want you guys to think that I was hiding anything. Detective Mark, but you are. Detective Reggie, we know you are scared to death right now. Dylan, oh, I am scared to death right now. Detective Reggie, we know. Dylan, you guys see this right now. Detective Reggie, we know that. Detective Reggie, all my partner is trying to do is to get out why they did what they did. He is trying to solve a murder, bro. Somebody lost their life today. Dylan, I know, buddy. I want somebody to find out who shot them. Detective Reggie, but if you mean that, you are going to start being truthful to us, because talking to you is like pulling teeth. Detective Mark, you are making it worse for yourself. Leave the fear out of this. Stop the fear. Dylan, okay. So, I was not at work today. I was inside for about 95% of the day. I decided to go outside and roll a blunt. I opened my garage door. I heard, boom. It was a bang. I stopped rolling the blunt. Reggie came over and threw the guns. He threw the gun underneath the toolbox. I saw Reggie and a black guy. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I want to hide them. Sidney just shot himself." I said, "Dude, I am getting out of here." He ran out. I locked the doors. I got in my car and I left. Detective Mark, what did the other guy look like? Dylan, he was a black guy. He is tall, skinny, black skin. Detective Mark, what you just said now at 1:52 in the morning is a whole lot more than what you have said at all. Hope you know what I mean. Dylan, all right. I apologize, guys. I'm just scared. Detective Mark, well, you should be scared. You made me look like a fool because I believed in you. Dylan, give me a minute. Detective Mark, sit tight. Detective Mark came out of the interrogation room after he chatted with Dylan. He narrated what happened in the interrogation room to other detectives. Dylan identified Reggie. He stated that Reggie said Sidney had shot himself. He said that is unlikely based on the fact that there was a loud argument that was going on before the incident happened. The team searches for Reggie on Dylan's Facebook page. Here it is the detective who searched said. He found a picture that looks like the guy in the photo from Dylan's phone. He found Reginald's last name. His last name is Sutton. 54 years old Reginald Sutton has multiple felony convictions including burglary, drug possession, and shooting with intent to kill. Detective Mark went back to the interrogation room, where Dylan has been held. Detective Mark, who is this? Dylan, that's Reggie. Detective Mark, you are saying that's him? That's Reggie. Dylan, yeah. Detective Mark, are you sure? Dylan, yeah. Detective Mark left the interrogation room and returned to his team members. He said Dylan identified the guy in the picture as Reggie. He said that means they have a lead. Yeah, that means we have to find him. And that car is still running around somewhere. Another detective said. Then, the team gets body cam footage from first responders to the shooting. While the team was watching the video, they saw an officer walking down from the crime scene. They also saw a white Monte Carlo that has broken down in the video. The car broke down while trying to leave the house. A detective said that car is probably the suspect's vehicle. The video showed where the officer was asking a young man if the car belongs to him. The young man said the car is his cousin's car. The young man said he was going to get gas. The officer asked how long has the car broken down. The young man said it broke down 30 minutes ago. The officer asked if he heard or seen something around where his car broke down. The young man said he did not see or hear anything. The officer told him someone has been shot around the place that his car broke down. The detectives who watched the video are convinced that the guy in the video does not look like Reginald. They said probably the young man is the second guy they are looking for. The detectives are convinced that the car in the video is the car they are looking for. Detectives said all officers should be on the lookout for the white car. 17 hours in, Detective White gets the autopsy report. White said the autopsy reveals that it was as if someone was coming from the back and putting it up against his head and pulling the trigger. He said he was going to take what he has to the district attorney's office, and he will see if they can get a warrant for the arrest of Reggie. Detective Watkins gets a call from Sydney's family. She said they are sure that Reggie has something to do with the death of the victim. They said that Reggie is part of their family. Reggie and Sydney are first cousins. He said the family is saying that Reggie is hiding somewhere in the out east. After some minutes, Detective White got a phone call from the district attorney's office. He said they have been able to secure an arrest warrant for Reggie. With an arrest warrant in hand, the team hits out the east of Tulsa searching for Reggie Sutton and the white Monte Carlo. The team hits all the streets in the east, but there was no luck. After hours of searching, Reggie turns himself in. Reggie was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective White, I know you are going through a lot right now. Reggie interjected. Well, Mr. White, the first thing I had to do was to turn myself in and do the right thing. Detective White, that is a good decision. I appreciate that because that shows me a lot. Detective White, tell me about what happened last night. Reggie, okay, it was my cousin, Sydney Ray. I was over at the house. Sydney Ray does crack and he gets on it and starts fighting people, chucking bricks at people, cursing people. He's kind of crazy, you know. So, I said this is my first cousin. First of all, Mr. White, let me let you know, his mother and I are sisters. He started yelling and woofing, and that's how he does. So, I say, chill my cousin. You can be doing people like this. You yell at everybody that comes into this yard. After some few minutes, he pulled a 9mm out. I said, I'm your cousin, man. Are you going to do that to me? So he sat back down and sat in the brown chair he was in. So he started doing it again. That was when I walked up to him. So he took a knife and hit me on my belly. So he took the gun out. I said, are you going to do that to me like that, man? So we started dragging it. It went off. Detective White interjected. Reggie, it went off, sir. Detective White, you know I have interviewed a lot of people out there last night. Some of the people I interviewed lived in that area, and they said it was not only you that was up there. They said there was another male that you were with. I am interested in knowing who he is. Who were you with? Detective White asked again. Reggie, Terry Ratliff. Detective White, I need to find Terry because he could corroborate your story. Do you know his number? Reggie, I don't have a phone. I do not know it by heart. Detective White, is he the one? Did he leave in the car? I mean the white Monte Carlo. Reggie, yes. Detective White, where is the car right now? Reggie, it should be at his mother's house. Reggie gives the location of Terry's mother's house. Reggie, I'm letting them know about the car. A few minutes later, a detective said Detective Warren has found the car. He said when they went and knocked on the door to get permission to tow it off the property, a guy answered. The guy that answered was Terry. Terry agreed to talk and he was brought to homicide. When Terry got to homicide, he was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective White and Detective Kansas Corps entered the interrogation room. Detective White, just tell me the truth, that's it. Terry, I'm fixing to tell you. Terry continued. He said Sidney was right there. He said when Sidney smokes some dope, he usually gets irritated and starts talking a little noise about people. He said Sidney got up in Reggie's face at one point in time, and Reggie also got up in his. He said before he knew it, Sidney was sitting down, and Reggie was all over him. He said Reggie was getting ready to whoop Sidney. He said Sidney scratched him a little bit. He said Reggie came to him and showed him a scar on his stomach. He said that was when Reggie told him to hand the gun over to him. He said he didn't want to give Reggie the gun, but Reggie intimidated him. He said he handed the gun to Reggie. The next thing he knew was Reggie shot Sidney in the head. Detective White, okay, that's it. Terry, he murdered that dude. Detective White, that's the part I need to know exactly clear about. So how did he do it? Where was he standing when he did it? Detective White asked again. Terry, right over him. He grabbed the gun, went back over to Sidney, and stood over him. He backed him back. Sidney was still talking then. Detective White, what was he saying? Terry, he was saying shoot me, shoot me. Terry said the next thing he heard was a gunshot. Detective White, where did he shoot him? Terry, it was on the right side of the head, I guess. That's all I know. Detective, Sidney wasn't fighting him or doing anything. Terry, Sidney was a good guy. He didn't deserve to die. Terry said, after that, Reggie said he better not say anything to anyone. He says Reggie told him to hide the gun in Dylan's garage. He said he grabbed the gun. He said he took it up and pits it up under the tool chest. Detective White, when you reached under there to get rid of that gun, did you see any other guns? Terry, I didn't notice any. Detective White, where did you go from there? Terry, I tried to leave but the car didn't start. He hopped in the car with me. He said Reggie said they needed to get away before someone calls the police. He said Reggie said he should stay. Reggie shot himself if anyone asked. Terry said he told him they were going to detect that he didn't shoot himself. He said they ran back to Dylan's house and Dylan drove them to a gas station to fill up a gas can. He said when they came back, they dropped him off the car. He said he saw the police walking towards the car shining a light on it. He said the police asked if the car belongs to him. He said he told them they went out to fill the car because it ran out of gas. He said he got the car started and he immediately went to his mother's house. He said he stayed right there till morning. Detective White, I'll be right back. You can hang here real quickly. Detective White returned to the interrogation room, where Reggie was being held. Detective White, well, the version that we got from your friend over there was a little bit different from yours. Reggie, how far was I off? Detective White, quite a bit. Detective White, here is what I think happened based on the version that he told me. I do not doubt that Sidney has got some issues. I think we can agree on that. Reggie, yeah, we can. Detective White, I've heard about how he is kind of so forth, and I think he was probably running his mouth to you and being disrespectful. Reggie interjected. He showed the scar on his stomach to Detective White. He said that was when Sidney stabbed him. Detective White, that was what pissed you off. Reggie, pissed the out of me. Detective White, then, you decided to handle it, and it went too far. Reggie, yeah. So, what will I be charged with, Mr. White? It could be no self-defense for what he did to me, could it? Detective White, no, I don't think so. I think that it raises it to another level. Reggie, I understand. Less than 24 hours after Sidney was murdered, Detective White solves his case. Reginald Sutton subsequently pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years. Ballistics testing confirmed that a 9mm pistol in Dylan's garage was the murder weapon. None of the other guns found in the garage were determined to be involved in the murder. Dylan later admitted to helping Reggie and Terry flee the scene. Dylan and Terry were not charged in connection with the case. 9 months later, Sydney's family remembers him. How many murders happen every day across the globe? Is it the police or the government's fault, or the blame goes to someone entirely different? What do you think? When it comes to crimes, there's a lot of questions, but not so many answers. So many unsolved crimes, so many lost people that were never seen again, so many broken hearts left. This story begins on a very cold night in January, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Life is so unpredictable, even at 1:45 a.m., when you must be warm in your bed having your best sleep, excited for what tomorrow brings. Little did we know that the world would wake up with terrible news: other murders. 3 people were murdered: a 58-year-old black male called Kenneth Sellers and a 52-year-old woman along with her 28-year-old son. Where can we start? Just like every crime story, even this story begins with a 911 call. On the north side, a man in the neighborhood where the murders took place heard a woman screaming and noises of gunshots. He decided to call and explain what he heard. After some time, the police arrive at the place where the shooting happened. They decide to not waste time and get in the house as fast as they can, in case someone needed help. Unfortunately, there were 3 victims. When the police got in the house, they noticed that the victims weren't standing in the same room when the murder happened. It looked like they died exactly where they were before the tragedy happened. Almost like execution style, said the police officer. However, each of the victims has a name, each of them has a story. The first victim was standing by the door, the youngest one, the son of the mother, a 28-year-old, named Thomas. He attended Central High School in Tulsa. He was self-employed. He was shot in the chest and his head. The second victim noticed was murdered in the hallway, the 52-year-old woman, shot in her chest. The house was owned by the mother and her son. They lived together. The 58-year-old victim, called Kenneth Sellers, was the last one to be seen by the police. He was murdered in the bedroom of the house. He was on his knees next to the bed. He, too, was shot in the chest and his abdomen. We can surely say that Kenneth and the woman might have been in a relationship together. His sister confirmed it and told us that he was staying there for a whole week. Kenneth Sellers was born and raised in Oklahoma. He worked as a welder for over 10 years. He came from a big family, the youngest of 5. Kenneth, unfortunately, leaves behind 6 children and 9 grandchildren. I'm pretty sure he is very missed. When the police arrived at the house, they noticed that both doors were open. The front door of the house and the back door of the house. The back door of the house didn't look like it was forced to be opened. It seemed that the one that got in pretty easily and knew his intentions. The house was in terrible condition. It's quite the mess, Sarge, says the police officer. In the back of the house, the bedroom had been tossed. The killer, who came into the house, was for sure looking for something he knew that it was there. Perhaps something he owned, something that was borrowed from him. There were clothes, blood everywhere. The drawers were out. What were they looking for? There were a bunch of empty plastic bags on the floor. I guess they took for what they were looking for: drugs. There was some blood in the bed, in the pillows. There is a casting there too, said the police officer. Detectives believe that the young 28-year-old victim was shot in the right side of the bedroom. Then he ran out of there while rubbing up against the wall as he is going. The wall had blood prints. Then he ran over to the living room, where he collapsed and died there. As they were going around the house, the police officers saw that there were castings all over the house. There were 9mm shell castings. As the team was searching for fingerprints and DNA samples, the rest of the team got informed that the neighbor that had called 911, that heard someone scream so loud, that was the 28-year-old victim's girlfriend. She was already transported downtown to be asked questions about this tragedy. She might know something. She might even be the killer itself. We're about to find out. The girlfriend of the victim has a child, a 5-year-old, a daughter. She left the child to her sisters to babysit. She was the first one to get questioned about this whole situation. The police hoped that she would say something useful. And there she was. She looked scared. She was shaking. Her voice was shaking. The first thing that came out of her mouth was, "Why did they do that to my baby?" She was talking about her boyfriend, the young victim, Thomas. The only thing she seemed to care about was if they are dead or not. She goes, "Can I ask you one thing? Are they dead?" And when the police confirmed that they are dead, she busted into tears immediately. The officer said, "I'm sorry for your loss, but we don't even know what relationship you had with the victim." She explained while crying that they had been dating a couple of months and that he used to sleep multiple times over at her house. That night the victim was staying at her apartment. The officer said, "What happened?" She started telling things in detail, as if the victim has said to her, "I want you to go with me so we can go get stuff from the house." The girlfriend said no because it was too late. They had to lay and sleep. But the girlfriend said that she does her washing at the victim's house. She said she washes her clothes and her baby's clothes there. So, she had to take some laundry from the victim's house and agreed to go without asking too much. The 28-year-old victim, Thomas, told to his girlfriend that his friend Melvin is coming too. The police officer asked her about this guy named Melvin. She said they were friends. Well, that they recently became friends. She says that Melvin used to always steal from her boyfriend, the victim. She says he came to her apartment. The police officer asked her about her daughter and who she was at the moment with. She said she left her child with her sister and her sister's boyfriend, saying that she isn't her blood sister, but she stays directly right across the hall from her apartment. The police officer asks, "So this Melvin comes at your apartment, picks you and your boyfriend, and you go where?" She answers with no hesitation, "We get in the car, me, Melvin, and my boyfriend. There was some other dude that I've never seen before," she says. Detective Mark Kennedy asked her, "What was the purpose of this ride? Tell us." She said that she had no idea. She didn't ask a question. She had to take some laundry and that's it. She says, "Sir, it was my only opportunity. I don't have a car." However, she continues with the story. "We arrived at the house. We go right around the corner to 29th, where the shooting happened. The first to get out of the car was my boyfriend. In the car, it was only me, Melvin, and the other unknown guy. The other guy that I didn't even know who it is, not even his name, left the car too." She says Melvin was in the front seat, and she was in the back seat. She says they were taking so long. All of a sudden, Melvin speaks on the phone with someone and says that he had to go and take his girlfriend. It sounded so fishy, like something bad would happen. She didn't believe it. She said to Melvin that they should wait for the others. He started the car, but I insisted and said no. She started screaming and saying, "No, take me back to go and take my man. What are you doing? Why would you leave them?" He wasn't even responding. He just drove to the corner of the street and came back. At this moment she knew something bad is gonna happen. Or at least something bad just happened, but she didn't know yet. She said that it wasn't even a minute, that they just looped. And we go back at the front of the house. I go in the house and see that. She says, boom, he goes off and I see that I walk in the house to that. By that meaning she saw what happened. Officer goes, "So, who is the killer?" She goes, "The man that went out of the car." But she had no clue who that was. The only things that she said were, he had a black hoodie, he was brown-skinned, Melvin knows him. The police ask her about Melvin. Who is he? How old is he? And much more. She tells that Melvin is between 2 to 6-year-old. He stays in Gilcrease Hills with his dad. She says that she doesn't know Melvin's last name. This information was so good for the police and for the family's victims that deserve to know who is the killer if the girlfriend is being completely honest. Detective Diana Bauman decided to search for a man named Melvin in Gilcrease, a man in his 22nd that is living in the Gilcrease Hills neighborhood. Luckily, they did find a possible match, a photo so they can show it to her and see if Melvin is the one that we're looking for, the possible killer. He is Melvin Porter. The detective shows to the girl a picture of Melvin and asks her, "Who's that?" And she immediately recognizes him. She says that he is the one that she is talking about. The investigators ask her, "Let's go back to the beginning. Tell us the previous story that Melvin and the victim had." She says that probably a week and a half ago, the victim, her boyfriend, gave Melvin $300 to buy him a gun, a 9mm handgun. But Melvin never gave him the gun. He kept the gun for himself, and this is why they had fallen out. She believes that everything started because of this argument between Melvin and the victim. Everything about the gun. So, when did they make up? They asked her. They had made up and become friends on the same day that the victim was shot to death. She said because apparently, Melvin gave back everything he owned to the 28-year-old victim. The investigators asked her if her boyfriend sold drugs. She told the police that the victim used to sell drugs. "I know he previously has. He just did 17 months for that," she says. They asked her about what kind of drugs he sold. Marijuana, cocaine, but she didn't know. As Detective Mark Kennedy was talking with the girlfriend's victim, some of the police officers also went to her house to check out her child, only to find out that she had left her child alone in her house and lied about it. Her daughter is only 5-year-old. How can you leave a child alone at home with everything that's going around the world? Since she lied about this, what about other stuff? Can we trust her? Is there more to the story? Detective Mark Kennedy asked her about her daughter, and she admitted to leaving her child at home but insisted that everything she said was true and she could be trusted. She felt sorry for leaving her daughter alone in the apartment. The Petrel went into searching for the 25 Melvin Porter in Gilcrease Hills, hoping that his story is gonna match with the girl's story. This was a brutal crime that 3 people died from it. I want to know who did it, says Detective Mark Kennedy. 3 hours later, patrol radio hits with the news that they found him and arrested him for drug trafficking. He had drugs, meth, he had 37 grams on him. It was time to hear Melvin's story. Detective Mark Kennedy introduces himself to Melvin and starts asking him questions. Melvin seemed so chill, not nervous at all, saying that he had nothing to do with the triple homicide and that he hadn't been there that night, only some hours before, but not when they were shot to death. He tells that he was there that day, at the victim's house, and told who it was there, his friend, his mom, and Thomas's mother's boyfriend. He says that Melvin and the victim were childhood friends. Melvin explained what kind of car he was driving, Ford Focus, what hour, and where he went next. When the police told him about what the victim's girlfriend told him, he just laughed and said that it wasn't true. Melvin said, "That's stupid. I don't care what she said to you all. I wasn't with her that night." He doesn't seem to like the victim's girlfriend. The detective notices and asks him what's your problem with her. He kept saying how she always used to steal from the victim, how she always used to be high on drugs, how she always used to stalk behind the victim's back. The detective asks Melvin if he has ever bought a gun for the victim, as the girl said. But Melvin said no. He said that he bought the gun for himself. "Where's the gun?" asks Detective Kennedy. Melvin said that he took the gun to clean it, saying that he has the receipt too. The detective asks him when was the last time he was in contact with the victim. He says that it was that day of the death of the victim and that he called him asking for drugs, for some weed. "But that didn't happen. What about the meth you had today with you?" asks Kennedy. "Did you take that from him?" "No," says Melvin. The police don't know what to believe anymore and time was running fast. Detective Mark Kennedy asks for evidence for a surveillance video of the victim's girlfriend's apartment. He might find a video of the entrance of her apartment. But then Detective Bauman goes through Melvin's phone and finds some very helpful texts. They discover a text that he shared with the 28-year-old victim, saying, "Bro, what's taking so long?" Does that mean that the girlfriend's victim was right? Melvin was there waiting in the car that night right outside the victim's house. The detective asks Melvin about this text and he says that he meant it for today. That they talked about finding him drugs but it didn't happen. Melvin still gives nothing. No clues. The girlfriend's victim gets arrested for child neglect. Melvin gets arrested for drug trafficking. But there's still a third person that we don't know who he is and what he did yet. Maybe he is the answer to all this messy big puzzle. They decided once again to look closer to Melvin's texts. Nowadays you can find a lot about a person through his phone. CPL Nathan Schilling discovered that Melvin texted someone that day before midnight saying, "Need a gun," hours before the murder happened. We're getting closer to finding out, I think. The same person that Melvin texted, that person texted back hours after the murder time saying, "I need some clean clothes, bro." His name was Christopher President. This person got some explaining to do. It seemed like he is the shooter. Investigators do their work, and they find a pic of Christopher President. Some information. Christopher President, a 27-year-old black man, was charged with a lot of stuff, burglary, drug possession, and much more. A father, has a son, a wife, a family. The investigation in Melvin's phone continues. They find that after the shooting, that night, Melvin has searched on Google about news about this case and downloaded a police scanner app. Melvin has been lying all this time, meaning that he is guilty of something. Is Christopher President the shooter, and Melvin's just a getaway ride? Getaway of a cold, brutal murder. All of this progress was made within just 48 hours. 2 days later, the videos of the girlfriend's victim's entrance apartment were sent to the office. Melvin said he never came to the girlfriend's house, so let's see the truth. And there it was, Melvin's car, a Ford Focus, just like he said, matching the same time frame. The girlfriend's victim was right all this time. Melvin was at her house, picking up both the girlfriend and the victim, then driving to the house where the shooting made place. The video was clear. Melvin wasn't who he said he was. 1 month into the investigation, the officers decide that they have enough proofs to charge Melvin for murder. He was still in jail for drug trafficking. It's his last chance to tell us exactly what happened and all about this Christopher President guy. So they went to Osage County Jail and Sheriff's Office, where he was being held. The detective started asking questions. Melvin still kept denying it. Nearly 3 weeks later, Margaret Hain Bell, Tulsa PD, discovered by locating the locations of both Melvin and Christopher's phones around that same time when the murder took place and found out that these two were together that night at the victims' locations. 1 month into the investigation, and they decide that it is enough evidence and decide to arrest Melvin. Now it was time for that detective Mark Kennedy to collect the DNA of fingerprints and the samples of the crime scene and see if it would match with our wanted Christopher President. After 2 weeks of searching for Christopher, the gang unit found him at his mother's house, arrested him for an unrelated outstanding warrant. The detective started to ask him questions, and after that, he would serve Christopher with his DNA buccal swab. He seemed nervous. They asked him about that the night of January 16th. He said that he has known about this case since his friend was arrested. His friend is Melvin. He knew the 28-year-old victim too, saying that he was friends with him too, that he was been at his house several weeks before he got shot to death. When asked if he was with Melvin that night, Christopher said no. He said that on the 15th of January, hours before the murder, his girlfriend gave birth to a boy. He was at the hospital. Melvin called just to say congrats to him, so Christopher asked for some drugs, pills, or something from Melvin since he got anxious about the fact that he became a father. He couldn't sleep. It helps with my anxiety, he says. So they went to a bar. They went to a bar near his mother's house, near the victim's house. After the bar, Melvin drove him back to the spittle, by his car, a Ford Focus. The detective asks about where he spent the rest of the night, and he says at the hospital. But his phone tells a different story. Christopher is making up a whole other story, so the investigator tells him the GPA coordinates, everything, and that night he was near the victim's house. The detective decides to call the lab and make the case even stronger. To see if his DNA profile matches, they asked him to open his mouth so they can take pieces of his DNA. After some time of waiting, the lab found no matches with Christopher's DNA. Kinda disappointing. However, the investigators put everything together, every piece of evidence, and the court decided to charge Christopher President with murder. They decided there was enough evidence. Christopher President was convicted of 3 counts of felony murder and 1 count of armed robbery. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Melvin, on the other hand, was convicted of 3 counts of felony murder and 1 count of armed robbery. He was too sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The 28-year-old victim's girlfriend pleaded guilty to child neglect and was sentenced to a 3-year suspended sentence and probation. However, she was not charged in connection with murders. The victim's girlfriend was a very big help in this case. This was a very brutal crime that has come to an end finally. This happened only because people are greedy. Greedy for money, drugs, for having things that don't belong to them. So greedy that sometimes they forget the value of life. How precious life is. How can you take innocent people's lives? People shouldn't suffer. Their life shouldn't end for others people wants. But who is to blame really? Police, government, people, you choose. At exactly 9 a.m. in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a caller called 911 to report an emergency. When the 911 operator answered the call, he asked the caller if she needed police, fire, or medical. The caller said he needs police and probably medical. The operator asked the caller for his address. The caller said it's behind a field 129th of McDonald's and Admiral. The operator asked the caller what was going on. The caller said a kid lying in the middle of a dirt road. He said the victim is a teenager and he is lying face down. The 911 operator asked the caller if the teenager is moving or breathing. The caller said he is not not moving and breathing. He said he thinks the teenager is dead. Detective Chase Calhoun, Detective Jason, and other team members headed to Tulsa. Detective Chase told his team members in the car that they received a call from an unknown person. He said the caller stated that they found a body next to a dirt road in the woods. Detective Jason said it's Detective Chase's first case, and he has to prove to them why they chose and initiated him. When the team arrived at the dirt road, they found the teenager lying face down just as the caller said. Detective Chase said the teenager should be 15 or 16. He asked the first respondents if they have gotten an ID for the teenager. They said they haven't. The detectives noticed bloodstains on the leg and back of the teenager's head. They also noticed that the teenager's pocket was turned on. Detective Jason said the pocket been turned on maybe due to the grabbing of the teenager's cell phone by his killer. Detective Chase asked the first respondents how long has the teenager been dropped there. Detective Jason said he thinks it's not more than a day. While detectives waited for the medical examiner, Detective Chase Calhoun spoke to the 911 caller. Detective Chase asked the 911 caller if he lives there. The 911 caller said he lives in his van. Detective asked the 911 caller if he was just cruising through the dirt road when he found the teenager. The caller replied in the affirmative. He said he was just on his way out when he saw the body lying there. Detective Chase asked the caller that when was the last time he drove through there. The caller said yesterday. Detective Calhoun asked him what time. He said 11:30 p.m. Detective Chase asked the caller if he saw the body when he drove through there the last time. He said he didn't see the body. 2 hours in, the ME discovered that the teenager was shot once in his chest. They also saw foam, which the ME said could be from the inside of the car of the suspects. They noticed some marks on the body of the teenager. The ME said it looked like the boy was drugged and swabbed on his wrists and his ankles. The ME said DNA swab will be tested to look for trace evidence of a suspect. They will also take his prints back to the lab. Detective Jason said they should take photos of the victim's shoes and necklace. He said the photos will stand out for somebody. Detective Jason said the case is challenging, especially as it is the first case for Detective Chase. Detective Jason said once they find out who the teenager is, it will be 300 more pieces to the puzzle. He said after that, the family will be on board, and they will start finding out and getting leads. Detective Jason said the case will cause outrage because the boy is too young. Back at Homicide, Detective Chase Calhoun got an update from the crime lab. The crime lab was not able to identify the teenager by his fingerprints. Detective Jason said they should release the photos of the victim's shoes and necklace to the media. He said he hoped they will be able to get a lead if they do that. Detective Chase was also monitoring the city of Tulsa's 911 calls to see if anybody will call in about a missing person. The photos released by the team lead to a broadcast. An hour after the broadcast, a woman called in. She said her fiancé's little brother, 16 years old Darren Wilson, has been missing since last night. Sergeant Walker, who was the detective that answered the woman's call, asked her if the victim had a Facebook page. The woman said the victim had a Facebook page in his name. When detectives searched for the victim on Facebook, they found a picture that was consistent with his eyebrows, hair, height, and weight. Detective Jason said the picture they pulled out of Facebook has to be the victim. After the search, Sergeant Walker reached out back to Darren Wilson's family. Sergeant Walker asked the victim's family if there is anyone that can identify the victim from a picture. The family members said Darren's loved ones are gathered at his mother's house. Sergeant Walker said they will be on their way to the victim's mother's house. After a few minutes, the team led by Detective Calhoun arrives at the house of the victim's mother. Detective Calhoun met Darren's sister-in-law, LaJohnny Wilson, and showed her the photo of the victim. Immediately she saw the picture, she started crying. She told Detective Chase that the person in the photo is Darren Wilson. Detective Chase consoled her and other family members. He said he knew what they have been going through since the victim was declared missing. The 16 years old Darren Wilson is known to friends and family as Dada, attended East Central High School, where he played football and competed in track and field. He had hopes of going to college and playing Division I football. Darren left behind his parents and 3 siblings. Detective Chase asked Darren's sister-in-law if Darren's mom is there. She showed Detective Chase Darren's mother. Detective Chase told Darren's mother that her son was shot. He said her son was found in a field. Darren's mother asked Detective Chase if he think Darren was dropped off in the field. Detective Chase said that is what he knows. Detective Jason approached Darren's mom where she was standing and crying. He told her that they need the family. He said they need people who might have been hanging out with Darren last night. Darren's mother said he told her he was going to play basketball. Detective Jason asked her the time Darren left home to play basketball. She said it was around 5 the previous day. She said Darren told her that he was going to spend the night with his friend. And she said okay. She said Darren didn't mention the name of his friend. She said Darren only uses his phone to send Facebook messages through Wi-Fi. Darren's mother told the detectives that they have to find the people that killed her son. Detective Jason told her if there is any way to find those people, they will do it. Then, a family friend pulled detectives aside. Detective Chase asked the family friend if he knows whether Chase has been involved with bad people. He said he doesn't know. Detective Chase asked him if he knows what Chase has been up to lately. He said he just know that Darren does a lot of trading with shoes. He said Darren has been selling sneakers to make money. He said he dropped Darren a month ago. He said Darren went out of the car, traded shoes, and he got back in. He said he doesn't know whether Darren was involved in anything bad. Detective Jason told his team members that it is obvious that there are a lot of people that love Darren. He said when you meet someone's loved one who just lost their child, it's a tragedy. He said it can instill extra motivation to want to solve it. The team entered their car and headed to homicide headquarters. While they were driving, Detective Chase said the family wasn't able to get a whole lot of information. He said he wondered how Darren was getting the shoes they said he was selling. When they got back to homicide, Detective Chase told the team members that he hopes they will be able to get some of the victims' information about some possible motives as to why somebody would want to kill him the next day. He told the team that at the end of the first day, they don't have evidence and video surveillance or witnesses. He said he believes that the case is not a sprint but a marathon. He said eventually they will get to the finish line. The next morning, Detective Calhoun got a warrant for Darren's Facebook messages, hoping to identify who Darren met with the night he went missing. 26 hours in, the team got an update from Darren's autopsy. A small caliber bullet was recovered from Darren's chest. Based on the bullet trajectory, the ME believes that the shooter was standing over the victim. Detectives believe that the pieces of foam that were found on Darren's shirt were from the car he was shot in. The MEs did not find anything in the head for injuries. Then, the team got a recorded tip from the Crime Stoppers hotline. The voice in the recording said he has information on Darren. He said he thinks Darren was set up. He said just message me. After the team listened to the recording, Detective Calhoun sent a text to the tipster, and he immediately hears back. The tipster sent a message to Detective Chasing informing him that he can talk. The tipster said he was going to meet Detective Calhoun at the strip mall. Detective Calhoun and Detective Jason immediately entered their car and headed to the strip mall to meet the tipster. When they arrived at the strip mall, they met the tipster who was already waiting for them. Detective Chase introduced himself and introduced Detective Jason too. He told the tipster that they appreciate him for calling them to give them information. The tipster said Darren was a good kid. He said he didn't like the way Darren died. Detective Chase asked the tipster how well he knew Darren. Darren. The tipster said he and Darren played football together. Detective Jason asked the tipster about the stuff that Darren got into. The tipster said he think Darren was just selling shoes. Detective Chase asked the tipster if Darren was stealing or taking stuff that does not belong to him. The tipster said he thinks Darren was stealing the shoes he was selling because he was selling shoes that were worth $200 at the rate of $100. The tipster said the night before Darren went missing, he met with Darren to buy sneakers. He said after he left Darren, he went to meet a mutual friend. He said he told his friend that he got the shoes that were with him for $100. He said his friend asked him whether he got the shoes from Darren because Darren just sent him a picture of that shoe for $100. He said Darren had a plan for the $100. He said Darren wanted to buy a small gun the next day. Detective Chase asked the tipster if Darren was going to buy the gun from his mutual friend. The tipster replied in the affirmative. He said the next day he found out that Darren was dead. Detective Chase asked the tipster if he knew whether Darren met with his friend. The tipster said he doesn't know. The tipster said once he saw the description of how Darren died, he knew it was sketchy. He said he knew his friend did something with Darren. He said after he heard of Darren's death, he tried contacting his friend, but it was his mom that picked up. He said the mom told him that his friend is not there. The tipster said he thinks Darren was set up when he was trying to buy a gun. Detective Chase appreciated the tipster and told him to give him a call if he has any information. When they returned to homicide, Detective Chase told the team that they will run on the guy that was trying to sell the gun to the victim the next day. He said they are going to solve the case. He said it is his first homicide case, so it has to happen. In the first 48 hours, Detective Chase Calhoun identified a body that was found dumped in a field as 16-year-old Darren Wilson, and learned from a tipster that on the night Darren went missing, he was trying to buy a gun. Now, Detective Chase Calhoun needs to track down the young man who was going to sell the gun to Darren. 3 days in, Detective Calhoun looks up the tipster's friend and found a phone number for his mother. Detective Calhoun reached out to the mother of the tipster's friend. He told her his name and his place of work. He told her that he called about her son because he wants to talk to him. She said she hasn't seen her son since the night that Darren went missing. She said she didn't know he was gone until the next morning because he had put something in his bed to make it seem like he was there. Detective Chase asked of his cell phone. The mother said they had just taken his cell phone. She said she hasn't had any communication with him. Detective Calhoun told the mother that he is going to need her help. The mother agreed to call Detective Calhoun if she finds her son. A few hours later, the mother called Detective Calhoun that she found her son, and she brought him back home. Detective Calhoun told the mother that he is heading her way immediately. When detectives arrived at the house, the mother agreed that she will allow her son to talk at homicide. The detectives left the house with the boy and headed back to homicide. When they got to homicide, the boy was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Detective Jason and Detective Chase were the detectives that entered the room to interrogate him. When they entered, Detective Chase introduced himself and introduced Detective Jason. He asked the boy if he knows why he was there talking to them. He said it's because Darren is dead. Detective Chase asked the boy that when was the last time he hung out with Darren. He said he hung out with Darren a couple of weeks ago before school ended. He said the last time he saw Darren was about a month ago, but they talked on Tuesday and Wednesday. Detective Jason asked the boy what he and Darren talked about. He said he needs him to be 100% honest with him. The boy said Darren was trying to buy a gun, and he knew some people that were selling guns. He said Darren called him and told him that he has $100 and he needed a pistol. He said around 8 p.m. on Wednesday, he talked with Darren. He said he told Darren that he doesn't know if he can get the pistol, and he pushed away from the conversation about the gun. He said that was the last time he spoke to Darren. Detective Jason asked him what happened next. The boy said he heard that Darren died around 2 p.m. on Thursday. Detective Chase told the boy that it looks a little bit funny that he and Darren were talking about buying a gun, and then Darren disappeared, and he also disappeared. Detective Jason asked the boy if he understands how it looks like, and he replied in the affirmative. Detective Jason said what it looks like. The boy said it looks bad. Detective Chase told the boy that they need to figure out what happened that night. The boy said what happened that night was that he never talked to Chase again. Detective Chase asked the boy where he went to when he left his mom's house that night. He said he went over to sleep at a friend's house. Detective Chase asked for the phone number of the friend, and he gave him. Immediately, detectives collected the phone number. They stepped out of the interrogation room. Detective Calhoun called the friend to check the story of the boy. Detective Calhoun asked the friend if the boy was there overnight. The friend said that the boy was there overnight. Detective Chase and Detective Jason returned to the interrogation room. After fact-checking his claim that he was at his friend's house throughout the night, Detective Chase asked him if he was familiar with DNA. He said he is familiar with it. Detective Chase said what he can do now is that he will take a buccal swab from the boy. He asked the boy if he is cool with it. He said he is cool with it. Detective Chase told the boy to open his mouth. When the boy opened his mouth, he collected the swab he needed for the DNA test. After Detective Chase took the swab, he asked the boy why Darren needed a pistol. He said he doesn't know. Detective Chase asked him if Darren had a beef with someone. He said Darren doesn't have because Darren was just one of the laid-back people. He said Darren was an outgoing type, so he had a lot of friends. He said Darren just wanted money. Detective Chase asked the boy where Darren was getting money for all the shoes he was selling. He said he doesn't know. Detective Chase asked if he knows whether Darren was hitting licks on people. He said he thinks Darren usually hit a house that has no occupant. Detective Chase asked if it was like breaking into a house, and the boy said yes. As day 3 continues, one of Darren's family members called detectives with a potential lead. He said words on the street were that Darren reached out to a second man looking to buy a gun. He said Darren met with the guy the night before he died. Corporal Nathan Schillings followed up on the lead. He got to know that the suspect is wanted in a shooting. He got to know that police had stopped a suspect couple of months ago after his warrant came out, but he ran from the police, and he has been on the run since then. Detective Calhoun called the warrant squad to try and bring the man in on his unrelated warrant. 12 more days went by with no sign of the second man that Darren tried to buy a gun from. Detective Calhoun was in his office when he got a call from the crime lab. The crime lab told Detective Calhoun that DNA from an unknown male was found on Darren's ankle, but it doesn't match the DNA of the first young man that Darren tried to buy a gun from. 15 days into the investigation and desperate for leads, an inmate from a neighboring city jail claiming to have information about the murder reached out to Detective Calhoun. The inmate claimed that the second man that Darren wanted to buy a gun from asked his father to hide a pistol for him. The inmate claimed that the potential suspect left the gun at a motel where his father stays. She said the gun could be related to the murder. Detective Calhoun hopes that they can put pressure on the father to tell them where his son is. 6 hours later, with a search warrant in hand, the team stakes out the father's motel room. Warrant's detectives spotted the father approaching his room. Detective Calhoun radioed his team that he wants a couple of guys to go ahead and get up on the door of the suspect's father so that he doesn't get back out of the room. He said he will be right behind them. As soon as the suspect's father entered the room, detectives approached the door and told him to open his door. The team handcuffed the suspect's father and searched his room. Detectives found drugs, but they didn't find a possible murder weapon. The team arrested the father for the drugs they found in his room. Detective told the father that they will let him go if he can tell them where his son is. Detective Jason said he is hopeful that the father will shed more light on where his son is. When Detective Calhoun interrogated the father, he agrees to help detectives track his son. The dad told detectives that he was going to check back some things and get back to them. Detective Chase said he hopes the dad comes up with something concrete. 3 days after detectives spoke with the father, He gave them a location for his son. The detective met his son at the location, and they brought him in on his outstanding warrants. Detective Calhoun entered the investigation room where the boy was being held, and he introduced himself to Bai. Detective Calhoun noticed that the boy was crying, and he asked him why he was crying. Detective Chase told the boy that the reason why he wants to talk to him is about Darren. Detective Chase asked the boy if he was with Darren the night he died. He said he wasn't with him because he hasn't seen him for over a month. He said Darren was like a blood brother to him. He said he is the last person that will try to hurt him. Detective Chase asked the boy if there is any reason why his DNA will be on Darren's body. He said no. Detective Chase asked him if he will be willing to give him a swab. He said he is ready to give Detective Chase everything he needs right now. Detective Chase asked him if he knew the person that killed Darren. He said he doesn't know. He said all H was ready to tell Detective Chase all he knew about Darren. He said he learned about Darren's murder the day his body was discovered. He said that his girlfriend tried contacting him through Facebook the night before he was murdered. He said he looked at his Facebook and he saw Darren's message asking him if he knows where he can get any tools at the rate of $150. Detective Chase asked the boy about his Facebook page. He said he will give Detective Chase his password if he wants to access his Facebook. Detective Chase asked the boy that he heard that Darren has been hitting licks lately. He said that was how Darren got the shoes he sells. He said that was what he knew about him. Detective Chase told the boy to open his mouth so that he can get his swab. After collecting the swab, Detective Chase told him that he is going to jail that night because of all the warrants. He said he knew. Detective Chase left the room and took the swab to the medical lab. The second man's DNA was compared to the sample that was found on Darren's ankle, but it didn't match. Finally, 13 months into the investigation, Tulsa PD brought someone in who claimed that they heard information about Darren's murder. When he was brought to homicide, Detective Jason and Detective Calhoun went to the room where he was kept to interrogate the witness. When they entered, Detective Calhoun introduced himself and introduced Detective Jason. Detective Calhoun asked the witness that he heard that he said he had information about a homicide that happened a year ago. The witness said they heard a man admitting to picking Darren up. He said Darren and the man were in the back seat of the vehicle when the man shot Darren. Detective Jason asked the witness what the suspect did with Darren. The witness said they heard the suspect and his friends dump Darren in an area that matches up with where Darren was found. Detective Calhoun asked for the suspect's name. The witness gave Detective Calhoun the suspect's first name and Facebook profile. Detective Calhoun left the interrogation room to look up the suspect in the database. According to their records, the suspect was recently arrested with a small caliber gun. A detective said that could be the murder weapon. The suspect was released from custody, but his gun was still in police evidence. Detective Chase said he has to follow up with the crime lab for some testing on the firearm to see if they can get a ballistic match. He said if it matches, then, based on the story that they were given, it will be enough evidence to get an arrest warrant issued for the potential suspect. 2 months later, the gun did not match the murder weapon. Detective Calhoun will put out a bolo for the suspect with a warrant to collect his DNA. Then, nearly 2 years after Darren's murder, Detective Calhoun was out working on another case when he got a call from patrol. The suspect finally turned up when the patrol pulled him for a traffic violation. Detective Chase headed to where the patrol team detained the suspect. When he got there, the suspect was sitting in the back seat of the patrol team's car. Detective Chase knocked on the mirror of the car and told the suspect to come down. Detective Chase showed the suspect a search warrant for his DNA. Detective Chase told the suspect to open his mouth, and he collected the swab he needed. After collecting the swab, Detective Chase asked the suspect if he was interested in going downtown to talk to him about a homicide. He said he wasn't interested. Detective Chase said he will probably be seeing him soon. He told him to take care of himself, and he entered his car and drove off. 2 days later, Detective Calhoun got a word from the lab. They told him that the suspect's DNA did not match the DNA that was found on Darren's ankle. Detective Calhoun said he is disappointed. He said it doesn't mean that the suspect was not the killer, but he needs to reassess the case and look at what they got. Detective Calhoun worked the case for 2 more solid years without any leads. The case remained unsolved. Detective Calhoun said he wants the public to know the case is still an active investigation. He urged anyone that has information to call the tip line. Nearly 4 years after Darren was killed, his family still hopes someone knows something that will help detectives solve the case. 3:03 a.m. in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a security guard calls 911. The 911 operator asked if the caller needs police, fire, or medical assistance. The caller replied by saying he needs the assistance of the police. The caller said his lead is out there right now. He said he just found a body out in the parking lot. When patrol arrived, they found a woman's dead body wrapped in a blanket. The team hopes to identify the victim through her fingerprint. While the investigation was being carried out on the crime scene, Detective Reggie discovered a camera in a house close to the crime scene that could give them a lead. He and the other detective decided to visit the house to see if they could get footage. After collecting the footage, they headed back to homicide for investigation. While watching the video footage, they discovered that 14 minutes before the security guard called 911, a white car parked where the victim was dumped. Just outside Mobile in Alabama, policemen got a report of a man shot outside his house. A caller who called 911 said the victim was shot in the yard. He said it was life-threatening. Before policemen arrived at the scene, family members rushed the victim to the hospital. The victim was taken to Health University Hospital. 37 years old Joe Dickerson, a car enthusiast who wished to take over his father's garage, is the victim. He was survived by 9 children. Joe was shot once in the abdomen. When mobile detectives arrived at the scene, a witness came forward. The witness agreed to talk when he gets to homicide. The team left the scene of the crime for further investigation at homicide. As soon as they got to homicide, the witness was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective Barnes entered the investigation room to question the witness. Detective Barnes told the witness to tell him what happened. The witness said he has only agreed to talk because the victim is his cousin, and he has a lot of children like him. The witness said he wasn't in the yard when the shooting happened. He said he was at the corner store coming down the street. He said he popped up into the house moments after the shooting. He said he saw the shooter running with a gun in his hand coming down the street. Detective Barnes asked the victim if he knows the shooter. The witness said he knows him very well. He said his name is Dillion Fox. He said the shooter is popularly called Little D, and he just got out of prison. The witness said he can confirm that Dillion Fox is the shooter because he saw a gun in his hand. He said he saw him clearly because it was daylight. Detective Barnes asked the witness the type of gun he saw in the hand of the shooter. He said it wasn't a Clint Eastwood gun. Detective Barnes asked if there was anyone in the house at the time of the shooting, but the witness said he does not know. The witness said the victim had told him that he and Dillion Fox got into an argument. He gave detectives the name of another cousin who saw the victim and Dillion arguing. The detectives asked him when that was. He said it was 20 to 30 minutes before he showed up. The detectives asked if he knows what led to their argument. He said Dillion was mad because the victim was doing better than him. Detective Barnes asked who owns the house where the victim was shot. The witness said the house belonged to their grandmother. He said everybody stays there when they have nowhere to go. He said there were a couple of people he thinks were there at the time of the shooting, but they don't want to talk to the detectives. He said he will try and make them talk. Lead Detective Jermaine Rogers arrives after speaking with other family members at the hospital. When Rogers looks for Fox in the database, he finds that Fox is 34 years old. The team heads out to look for the cousin who witnessed the argument. 13 hours in, detectives track down the cousin at a store near the crime scene. He was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Immediately, Detective Jermaine entered the investigation room. He asked him to talk about what he knows about the shooting. He said Little D was running his mouth. He said a few moments later, he heard someone calling his name. Detective Germain asked him where Little D was standing when he called his name. He said Little D was standing by the yard. Detective Rogers asked him what they were arguing about. He said they were arguing about a couple of dollars. He said Little D was saying his name like everybody that owes me will pay me what they owe me. He said he was just sitting somewhere. He said he left him and turned to the victim. Detective Germain asked what he was saying to Joe. He said he was telling Joe that he was going to kill him. He said he felt like he just doesn't like Joe because Joe did not owe him money. He said while Little D was arguing with Joe, he told him he was going to the 8th Street and he will be back. He said he probably went to get a pistol. The witness said he went to a store to get a soda. Little D had already dipped off before he came back. He said it was when he was coming out of the store that he heard a couple of shots. He said it was like one, like pow. Then he heard pow, pow. He said as soon as he heard the shot, he knew something had happened to Joe. He said he knew he premeditated and did it because that was what he always wanted to do. Detective Germain asked the witness if he witnesses the shooting, and the witness said he did not. Detective Germain asked the witness if there was someone in the apartment before the shooting took place. He said his little brother was there. In the murder of an unidentified woman, detectives hope security camera caught the killer leaving her body in a hospital parking lot. The security camera pens away before the suspect got out. Detective Reggie and other detectives watch the video together to see if they can get the suspect or at least get a lead. Detective Reggie said 2 seconds earlier they have gotten a tag. Detective Reggie moved to another camera, but he discovered that the camera did not pen. Detectives looked up for the car and discovered that it was either Toyota or Honda Accord. A few hours later, a detective said he went to the autopsy when they were able to clean her body up. He said shots were all around the victim's body. He said it looks like the victim was just from a very close distance. He said the bullet that killed her was the one that hit her jugular. A few moments later, a detective said he has just received an email from the lab guy. The crime lab got a match on the victim's fingerprint. Her name is Marisu Dowies. Maris Dowies is a 49-year-old woman who was born in Tulsa. She leaves behind 3 children. The detective that received the email from the lab guy searched for Marisu Dowies in the database. He got a name of a guy who had domestic issues with the victim. His name is Lil Roach. He got a 2015 report which revealed that Lily Roach came to the door of the victim and even tried to break the victim's window. He pulled her by her hair. He dragged her and began to choke her. The charges were dropped against him because Marisu did not appear in court. Lil Roach's previous convictions include ferocity and drug convictions. After they finished searching, the detectives agreed that he is someone they needed to talk to. They also discovered in the course of searching the database that the victim had a son before she died. Detectives found an address for the son's employer. After some few minutes, the detectives headed up to find the son and the guy that had domestic issues with the victim in the past. Their first point of call is the address of the son's employer. The detectives arrived at the address in a few minutes and met the victim's son there. There is no easy way to say this, but your mom has been killed, a detective said to the son of the victim. The detective told him that his mother was shot this morning. The detective asked the young boy if his mother was dating or married to someone. The young boy said his mother is still married to his stepdad, but he knows they've had problems for years. The detectives asked the young boy the name of his stepdad, and he said his name was Eli Roach. The detectives asked the young boy where Eli was living presently. He told them Eli was living in his grandpa's old house. The detectives appreciated the young boy and left after he gave them the address of his grandpa's old house where he claimed Lil was leaving. The detectives immediately moved to the address to see what they could find. When they got there, they found out that it was a lonely place that seems like nobody was staying there. But they found bloodstains on some objects in the building which prompted the officers to approach a court for a search warrant so that they can search the entire building. The detectives returned to the building after they got a search warrant. This time they entered without hesitation. In the living room, detectives found blood, a single 3ED showcasing, and a pillowcase that had the same wrapping as the one the victim was wrapped in when she was shot. After some few minutes, a woman approached the detectives and said she used to date Roach. Detective, how long have you been dating Roach? She said she has been dating him for a year. Detective, what kind of car does he have? My car, a white Acura, she replied. The detective pulls up the video of the car seen in the surveillance video and asked her if that was her car. She replied in the affirmative. The detective asked how she would find Roach if she was to find him. He told her to think of some of the places Roach could be at that particular time. She told the detective that she does not know much of Roach's movement. She told him there was no way she could figure out where he would be at that particular moment. Last night on the phone, the family gave detectives an address of where to find the victim's close friend. It was reported that she was the last person that the victim was seen hanging out with. When detectives arrived at the apartment, they knocked and a woman answered. Detective, I am working on Mary's case and I know she was here the other night. Yes, she replied. She said it was the night before the last, and she left her apartment about 1/4 until 2 a.m. Back to the investigation of Joe Dickerson, detectives identified a possible suspect known as Ernesto Little D, who is Joe's cousin. Now, they need to find an eyewitness who was present at the scene. Joe's cousin, who has been speaking with detectives, told them they would probably get more information from his brother. Detectives asked him where they could find his brother. He said his brother would still be in the yard by the time detectives get back there. He said his brother might be hanging out in the family house while the shooting happened. Detectives left homicide and made their way back to the crime scene to see if they could meet the guy that might probably be there while the shooting happened. As detectives arrived, they found a possible eyewitness and he agreed to talk at homicide. He entered the car with the detectives and they all headed back to homicide. As soon as they arrive at homicide, the witness was taken to an investigation room for question. You know what we are here for? A detective asked. Yeah, for the murder of my cousin, he replied. I know it's going to be odd to talk about, but Joe needs your help to talk about what happened, the detective told him when he noticed he was still reluctant to talk. He started his speech with the word. Little D did not really like Joe. He said nobody ever figured out why. He said Little D had been drinking that morning, and he was loud all day. He said Little D just started talking out of nowhere and kept talking about how people owed him money. He said a few moments after, Little D started arguing with his brother. He said Little D was ready to fight him. He said his brother was also confronting Little D a little bit. He said Little D calmed down a little bit after he confronted him. He said after that Little D started threatening Joe. He said Little D told Joe that he was going to gun him down if he finds him here when he gets back. He said Little D left and disappeared for a little while and that was when he got access to a gun. He said he and his uncle was standing in the yard. He said his instincts just told him to stand there. He said he doesn't know why, but out of nowhere, the front door was sprung open, and he saw Little D's arm come out of the house with the pistol. He said that was how Little D shot Joe one time. Back to the murder of Mary, detectives just learned that her estranged husband, Alain Roach, has allegedly threatened to kill her in the past. Detectives are at the home of Mary's friend whose report showed that she was the last person that hanged out with Mary. Detective, so, in the past when you heard him say I'm gonna kill you, did you hear him say that more than once or you heard him say that one time? A detective asked. Probably more than once, she replied. Detective, I appreciate you, take care of yourself. Okay, she replied. As the first 48 winds down, the developing story showed that documents revealed that Mary was shot inside her home and investigators believed her husband dragged her outside and dropped her body off. An arrest warrant has now been issued out for Alain Roach. In the first 48, Tulsa Homicide responded to the murder of Mary, who was found shot and dumped in a parking lot. Homicide learned that the victim has been allegedly assaulted in the past by her estranged husband, Alain Roach. Homicide detectives headed to their homes to search the apartment. When detectives searched their home, they found bloodstains all over the house and a .380 casing. But they were unable to find Alain Roach. Overnight, patrol officers found the white Acura near the suspect's sister's home. A detective said he spoke with the suspect's sister yesterday. He said his sister told him that he showed up yesterday and he claimed that he was sleeping outside. She said he was hungry and he needed water. She said she asked him what happened and he kept saying it was an accident. She said she told him that he needed to turn himself in for questioning so that detectives can do their job. She said he told her that he was never going to turn himself in. She said after some minutes, he took off walking through the Northwest. After searching for Roach for 6 weeks without any luck, the team gets a lead that Roach is hiding in an abandoned trailer in North Tulsa. Detectives immediately made their way to the facility to see if they would find Roach. On getting there, the team detected that there is someone inside the trailer. It is left to see if the person in the trailer is Ella Roach. "Come outside of the door with your hands in the air," a detective said on loudspeaker. After some few minutes, "Time is up. You have to come out now or we are going to deploy paper balls into the trailer," the detective said through the loudspeaker again after they waited and no one came out. After some few seconds, Roach came out and handed himself over to the detectives. The detectives searched the trailer for the 380 but it was nowhere to be found. Detectives made their way back to homicide. Immediately they got to homicide, Roach was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective Reggie and another detective went into the investigation room where Roach was been held. "Detective, honestly we are here because Mary has died. So, tell us what you know about that." "I know that she died," Roach replied. The detective asked him how it happened. He kept quiet for some seconds. After that, he said his gun just went off. Back to the murder of Joe Dickerson, Detective Jermaine Rogers has finally found an eyewitness that said Little D pulled the trigger. The witness, while narrating his side of the story, said after the first shot, they heard a couple of more shots. He said Joe was looking towards the street, therefore he didn't see it coming. He said Little D shot Joe for nothing either than for pure jealousy. As the last 5 hours of the first 48 hours slip away, the search for Little D kicks off. In the first 48, mobile homicide was responded to the murder of Joe Dickerson, who was shot in a family member's yard. Joe's little cousin Ernesto Dillion Fox, who is also known as Little D, had threatened to shoot him after an argument in the past. Detectives have interviewed 2 family members. One of the family members interviewed was present at the scene of the incident. Detectives have gotten a warrant for Joe's arrest. After 3 months, with no sign of Little D, he turns himself in. "Man, do you know what we are here to talk about?" a detective asked. "Yes, sir," Ernesto Fox replied. "Do you wish to talk to me right now?" the detective asked him again. "I don't wish to another any questions now," he replied. "I got this lawyer that you can call," the detective told Little D. "All right," Little D replied. Outro. Ernesto Fox was charged with murder and he is awaiting trial. Criminal charges are often dropped or reduced, and the suspect is presumed innocent until proven guilty by a court of competent jurisdiction. 2 years after Joe's death, family and friends gathered at his graveyard to celebrate his 48 years birthday. They dropped flowers at his gravesite in remembrance of him. Back to Tulsa murder of Mary, Detective Ronnie meets her estranged husband, Ella Roach, to tell him how Mary ended up dead. Detective Ronnie: "How did it happen?" "It just went off," Roach replied. Detective Ronnie: "What type of gun was it?" Roach: "380. Detective Ronnie: "How did the gun just go off?" Roach said he kicked the table while he was arguing with the deceased, which made his gun go off. He said he was just a mad dog. He said everybody knows he and Mary argue all the time. Detective Ronnie: "So what happened after the gun went off?" He said firstly he knew she was shot. Then he realized she was not breathing. He said blood started coming out and she was kept on saying something that he couldn't put together. He said when she started losing a lot of blood, he quickly drove her to the hospital. Detective Ronnie: "What happened when you got to the hospital?" He said she was still feeling hurt. He said he went around the other side of the car and he took her out of the car. Detective Ronnie: "Where did you later drop her?" "Parking lot," Roach replied. Detective Ronnie appreciated Ronnie for turning himself in and talking to him, but he finds it difficult to believe that his gun went off because he kicked a table. Outro. Ellie Len Roach was charged with murder and he is awaiting trial. Criminal charges are often dropped or reduced, and the suspect is presumed innocent until proven guilty. This story takes place in Atlanta, GA. Crime in Atlanta, Georgia has been a significant problem since the mid-20th century. Is it a safe place to visit or even live? How can you protect yourself and your loved ones? A 911 call is always a good idea, even though no one made a call this time. At 2 a.m., above the hill, a neighbor has heard noises of gunshots, and the police arrive and see a car in a very suspected place. The police immediately take a look at the vehicle. Male, bald head, asleep at the wheel, explains the officer. Unfortunately, the male wasn't asleep. He had a gunshot wound to the right side of his stomach, to the back of his head as well. "Go ahead and start fire and Grady out here," said the officer. The other officer said that the units were coming out. Without wasting time, Sergeant Jackson reports the death. Detective Andre Lowe was raised in this era. "I've been to the church of this area," he says. So Detective Andre Lowe knows the people that live here and is familiar with this place. When he took the first close look at the victim, he immediately knew who that male was. Detective Andre Lowe worked with the victim before, when the victim worked as security. The victim was a 48-year-old white man called Mike. The victim was born and raised in Atlanta, and he was a well-known promoter in Atlanta's clubs. He leaves behind a wife and 5 children. As the police officers take a good look inside and outside the car, they notice 2 castings in the vehicle's backseat. Not only do they find castings, but there is also a lot of money there. The police officers take a lot of pictures to use for evidence. There were thousands of dollars. It kind of makes you wonder if this was a robbery or what, because that money was still in the vehicle, says Detective Andre Lowe. As mentioned before, a neighbor has heard the noises of the gunshots. "Let's go and ask around the neighborhood," says the detective. Someone must know what happened. As they walked a block away, the detective and the police officers found 6 other castings. The police officers knocked on the neighbor's door and asked if they had heard anything. Then, the team found a witness around the shooting time but didn't call the police. The police officers decide to go and ask her some questions. "This is Detective Andre Lowe. Can you tell me what happened tonight?" he says. She says, "I was talking to Mike, right there, in the corner of the street. I was trying to be one of the bottle service girls. Then, I saw these 2 guys. One went to the passenger side and put a gun to my side. The girl said they would kill her if she didn't leave. She says that Mike, the victim, said that he has no money. Then they started shooting. She said that she immediately ran. She was scared." "Did you see how the other 2 guys looked?" says the detective. "No. All I saw was that they were all in black. They had on hoodies," says the girl. "Okay," says the detective. The police officers and the detective are happy that they found her. However, they got doubts too. Why didn't she call the police? Now or later, they still have some other good questions that she has to answer. 6 hours in, Detective Lowe meets with Mike's family, the victim's family. The medical examiner notified the family about the murder. Detective Lowe says that he is sorry for the loss, and he explained how the murder went and told them that he knew Mike. "We're just trying to figure the motive," as he says. "Did you all know if he had trouble with anyone?" asks the detective. "No, nothing of that nature," the family's victims replied. They say that Mike was a good man, a father of 5 kids. The family of the victim was heartbroken and in need of an answer. What happened that night? Who was responsible? Detective Lowe says that he will do his best to find out the truth. Some hours went by, and Detective Lowe got a text. The girl, the witness, texted him, saying that she had told him everything that night. There is one thing she didn't point to the detective, and it was that Mike had texted her that night of his death. The girl needed some money, and Mike wanted to help her. She told him she wanted to work as the bottle girls at a club. Mike said they needed to meet face to face to talk about it. She said yes. After seeing those texts, the detective discussed them with the police officers. So, it was Mike's money. Why didn't she call 911? They think that this girl might have trapped Mike. She might be at fault in this murder case. While the police were doing their job, the victim's family held a goodbye ceremony where the murder took place. They lit up candles and asked for justice, as they should. As time slips away, Detective Lowe still needed answers. A week later, the witness, the girl, decides to show up and answer some questions finally. "Let's start from the beginning," said Detective Lowe. She says, "I texted him, and I asked if he could help me make some money. I wanted to be a bottle girl, and he was like, yeah, sure. He asked me how much I needed, and I said $1,000, and he said okay. Mike wanted to meet up the very next day. Is there anyone else that knew about you meeting up with Mike? Asks the detective. Yes, the only person who knew was Damel because I told him, she says. She says that she told Damel when Mike was on his way to meet her. When was the last time you talked to Damel? The detective asked. She says that the last time she talked to Damel was right after the shooting. I called Damel and told him that my friend just got shot, she says. Detective Lowe asked why she didn't call the police. The girl said that she was scared. I didn't know what to do, she said. Has Damel something to do with this? Asked Detective Lowe. No, I don't think he does, she says. Is there anything that you're leaving out, forgetting? Asks the detective. Earlier that day, we went looking for guns, she said. The detective was confused and asked who she was with. She continues, it was me, Daniel, and 2 other guys. His friends. She doesn't know their names, but they bought 2 guns. I took my ID because Damel said so. They bought the guns under my name, she says. They knew Mike was coming to get the girl. They knew that he had $1,000. The moment the police officers think that the girl had something to do with the murder, she says something. I don't want anything to happen to my family, she says. She said that he said he would kill her and her mother. The detective said that it's our job to get somebody out of the streets that don't belong on the streets. Who killed this boy? They asked her directly. The girl asked them if she could start over, and they said yes. The girl said, I looked at their faces. The 2 other guys, I don't know their names, but I know that they were with Damel. The victim says that the shooters were Damel's 2 friends who bought the guns under her name. They asked her how the person looked, which put the gun to her side. If she doesn't know their names and who they are, she can tell us how they looked. It's the least she can do. She continues to describe the guy. He had dreads, medium height. The detective asks her if Damel and his friends knew if Mike had any money. She said yes. Where do Damel work? Asks the detective. She said that Damel works somewhere in Pennsylvania. So, Damel doesn't live here. He is in and out of here. Detective Lowe says, hold on, and goes to search to find pieces of information about Damel. He goes on the computer and writes his name and where he lives. Detective Lowe finds a photo that matches the data. Damel Roberts is only 21-year-old. He has a prior conviction for auto theft. He's got a P.O. box. Detective Lowe says they should take the photo and show it to the girl if he is the one we're looking for. That's what they did. Do you know who this is? Asks Detective Lowe while showing the photo to her. She says, that's Damel. The detective asks if Damel went back to Pennsylvania. The girl says that she doesn't know where he is now and hasn't heard from him. Detective Lowe asks her for a phone number or any social media of Damel. The girl says that she can access Damel's recent calls because they share a phone plan. The detectives ask for more. They want to know who the other 2 guys are so that they can take them off the streets. But she keeps saying that the first time she has ever seen those 2 guys was that day. She says that she thinks they live in Pennsylvania. The police officers want to get these guys off the streets before they go and hurt somebody else. Detective Lowe thinks that Damel was the driver, and the other 2 boys were the shooters. He sends Damel's photo to the beat officer, hoping to run into that man. The next day, with no leads on where Damel was, the detective starts to see through his phone. It looks like he is making many calls on a Philadelphia number. They say, so I'm gonna plug it into social media platforms and see who stands behind this number, says Detective Lowe. The phone number belongs to a woman in Pennsylvania. Detective Howard Griffin decides to send this over to the intelligence analyst and see if they can find more information. After some hours, they got news from the intelligence analyst saying that the young lady had a restraining order against a young man called Karim Arindel. He is from the Pennsylvania era as well. This guy, Karim Arindel, had dreads, and the detectives think he might be one of the 2 shooters with Damel that night. Karim Arindel is a 19-year-old who has prior convictions for harassment and unlawful handgun possession. Without wasting time, the detectives decided to show the photo of Karim Arindel to the witness and see if he was the guy that pointed a gun at her to see if she noticed him. Lowe and Detective Jerry and Shepard Head decide to meet with the witness. She was confident. She identified Karim Arindel. He is the one that put a gun on her side. The detectives decide to reach out to Philadelphia PD to get information on Arindel and his known associates. Philadelphia Police Homicide directed them into a detective from the Pocono Police Department. They say that these guys are a part of a blood gang. Arindel is a suspected gang member in the Pocono Mountains region of Pennsylvania. Apparently, there are kingpins up there. Detective Lowe gets informed that they deal with drugs, with dope. They are some hazardous guys. Looking at his photos and personal information, they noticed that Arindel had several pictures with a specific guy. The Pocono Police Department was able to link this guy. He was Javon Nunez. Detective Lowe says that it looks like it has a warrant now. 21-year-old Javon Nunez is wanted in New York for robbery. Detective Lowe's hopes that the victim identifies this guy too. A few hours later, the detectives meet with the witness again and ask her to view the photographs of Javon Nunez. Luckily, the witness identifies. The detectives high-fived each other. Detective Lowe is sure that Nunez and Arindel are the shooters. He says that he needs to track Damel first. A few days later, the case takes an unexpected turn. Damel is locked in jail for a stolen car out of Henry County. A friend of Damel passed a message that said that Damel wanted to talk to the police. The detectives decide to go fast before he changes his mind. They meet up at the Henry County Jail and decide to speak. "Tell me why you wanted me down here," asks the detective. "The incident that you are investigating, the murder case," said Damel. He said that there was an armed robbery and Mike got shot. Damel says that he knows who shot him. They are real gang brothers. Karim Arindel. The other guy's name is Javon Nunez, said Damel. Damel explains how the three of them were together that day. "We got here morning time and bought guns," he says. He says that the next day, the witness called Damel and told him that Mike was shot. "Were you with him when Mike got shot?" asks the detective. "No," he said Damel. He says that they had nothing to do with him. Damel says that he didn't give any false information. After they are done asking him questions, detectives talk with each other. Detective Lowe says she was texting with Damel. Damel for sure told the other two guys when Mike arrived. But Damel didn't tell us that. The team decides to wait on getting murder warrants until they can interview Nunez and Arindel. Then Lowe gets a break and Nunez is in jail. He was taken into custody in New York for his outstanding warrant for robbery. Detective Lowe and Griffin will fly up to Newark, New Jersey to interview Nunez in jail. Detectives must work with Pocono PD and try to locate Arindel. Before detectives can interview Nunez, the case takes a different turn. Arindel has an active warrant now for charges up there. The Pocono police will take Arindel into custody on an unrelated domestic violence warrant. While heading into Pocono Regional Mountains, the detectives decide to interview Arindel first. They finally meet with Arindel. The detectives introduce themselves. They say, "We came from Atlanta. There was a shooting and a victim. Do you know who Damel Roberts is?" "I kind of know him," says Arindel. The detectives tell him that they know that Damel came down to Atlanta from the Poconos, with a group of people too. "One of them was actually you, Arindel," the detective said. Arindel looked surprised. Arindel admits that he drove to Atlanta with Damel and Nunez. However, he kept saying that he had nothing to do with it, that he wasn't there. Detective Lowe decides to charge Arindel with murder. After that, he headed to New York to interview Nunez in jail. Detective Lowe got a call from the Suffolk County Jail. They say that Nunez didn't want to talk at all. This way Nunez gets charged for murder, and Detective Lowe will present evidence of Damel to the district attorney. In the end, Karim Arindel pleaded guilty to felony murder and was sentenced to 35 years. Javon Nunez was convicted for murder and armed robbery. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences. What about Damel Roberts? Subsequent evidence placed Damel near the crime scene at the time of the murder. Damel Roberts was convicted of felony murder and armed robbery. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences. The victim, Mike, will be missed. Justice will always be served. The breakup. On an evening at 6:45 p.m. near a quiet block in Mobile, Alabama, another crime happened. Every crime scene has its own story, and every time is heartbreaking. It all begins with a 911 call. What was the emergency? Someone had called 911 and told the address. It's a white house, and it's abandoned. There's a car parked behind the house, and there's a girl in there. The operator asked if the girl was inside of the vehicle. The caller said yes. The caller continues to describe the situation, saying that the girl got a pink towel covering her whole face and everything, and her windows are up. The caller said that he didn't know if the girl was breathing or not. The 911 operator says that they are going to alert the police. The patrol and the DMS responded and decided to go to the said location. They arrive at the area and find a woman in the passenger seat. She was dead. CPL. Kenneth Gillespie finds the place suspicious. It's a big abandoned house. The police officers ask about the victim's name. Who is she? The victim's name was Shanice Sumter, a black woman, only 27-year-old. She went to Murphy High School and earned her JED certificate. She worked as an insurance adjuster. Shanice leaves behind a large family. She was a mother and she had a 9-year-old son. Police officers and the detectives find out that she was shot in the left side of her head. Her cell phone was right down there to her legs. There was a gun right there, a .38 caliber revolver at her feet. The police officers were surprised and said that typically, they don't leave the weapon there when someone kills someone. One of the police officers says that it is a possibility that she had shot herself. Maybe it was a suicide. The police officer said the gunshot wound would be consistent if she was left-handed, but it's also possible that somebody in the driver's seat could have popped here as well. It was in the back of an abandoned house, and the police officers thought that it was a pretty big chance of being a suicide. It's a place where nobody would have seen anything. On the other hand, it's a good place for somebody to kill you, says CPL Kenneth Gillespie. Someone had called the reporter missing, and it was the victim's sister. Her sister called saying that she hadn't seen Shanice since Saturday. The police officer said that it would be a good idea to hear from her family. The police officer and the detectives meet up with the sister's victim. She seemed nervous, so they gave her some water. The officers say to her, "We don't know a lot yet, but we know that Shanice has been shot." Her sister didn't know and started crying. The officer says, "I am sorry for your loss. We don't know much. We don't know if it was self-inflicted or another person shot her." They asked the sister's victim if she had ever said anything about harming herself before. Was she the type to get depressed easily? Asked the officer. Her sister said that she had thoughts of harming herself before, but she always hid them. Was she left-handed or right-handed? Asks the officer. She said she was left-handed. The officers ask who is she involved in a relationship, and her sister tells her a name. The victim was in a relationship with someone called Peter Gales. He stayed with the victim. They lived together. When was the last time you talked to her? Asks the officer. She said yesterday. The detectives ask for the number of Peter Gales, and she gives it to them. Peter wasn't answering his phone. The detectives decide to look through the victim's phone. The text with Peter. They had texted yesterday at 11 a.m. The victim had texted him, "Peter, you rather be on the phone with a hoe. That is crazy. I am not happy about this, honestly. I want this to end. I am tired of you putting your hands on me. I want no boyfriend. I must do what's good for me." The team discovered she was fighting with her boyfriend Peter Gales the day before she was found dead. She was trying to get away from him. Peter has obtained a warrant for possession of cocaine. Let's bring him in. The next morning, detectives find Peter at his mother's apartment. They bring him in so they can start asking questions. "I am Detective Glue, and this is my partner Detective Rogers. You know what, we want to talk to you," they say. Peter says that the baby daddy of Shanice told him that she was shot. "How long have you been together?" the detectives ask. "It would have been a year in August," he said. He said that the last time they talked was the day before yesterday and that he and the victim got in an argument. He said he was riding in a black rental car. Peter explains, "We were in the car and then my side chick called me. My other girlfriend. Shanice got so jealous, she just got crazy. She kind of hit the cop and my gun just fell on the passenger side somewhere on the floor. I get her to drop me off. She left with everything in the car. My money and my gun were in the car. I had been texting to see where she was. I didn't get a reply." He says that the victim told him about suicidal thoughts before. "What other stuff has she told you?" asks the detective. He said that she always used to say how he didn't love her and made her look stupid. "I thought she was gonna come back. My girl is gone," says Peter as he cries loudly. The detectives tell him that Shanice was found in Dauphin Island Parkway. He didn't know that. The detectives don't believe him. The texts were showing something else. She wasn't happy with him. The detective tried to scare him a little bit and said, "There are 6 detectives that are listening to everything you're saying now. We want you to tell us what happened." This seemed to affect him. Peter goes, "It's just, she grabbed the gun so quickly. And we're arguing, going crazy. Next thing I know, a shotgun noise. I didn't know what to do. I drove around for some time." The detective said that, "I don't believe that she killed herself and that they completed the autopsy this morning. Based on that direction that bullet traveled, it wouldn't be possible for her to shoot herself." What happened in the car? Peter gives up and decides to tell the truth. "She had grabbed the gun. I grabbed the gun from her." She tries to hop up. When she jumped up, the gun went off. He says, "You had the gun on your hand, right?" He replied, "Yes." She was not moving. I put on the cover up. It was a towel. And then I left. 20 hours in the first 48 hours. Detective Gillespie closed his case. Peter did pull the trigger, even if he regrets it. Peter Gales was charged with murder and is awaiting trial. The victim was a mother that didn't deserve such tragedy to happen to her.